Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Unsettling Truths, the ongoing dehumanizing legacy of the doctrine of discovery by Marc Charles and Soon-Chan Rah. This is from chapter 1. You cannot discover lands that are already inhabited. I, Marc, said this almost under my breath as I walked past a line of men dressed as Spanish sailors from the 1490s. I was in front of Union Station in Washington, D.C., near the massive statue of Christopher Columbus overlooking the United States Capitol. Every Columbus Day, there's an official ceremony in this plaza honoring Columbus as the discoverer of America. I had stumbled upon this ceremony by accident the year prior. There were a few non-natives holding signs and protesting the ceremony, but nothing very disruptive. I went back the following year primarily out of curiosity. I wasn't intending to protest, nor did I want to make a scene. As I walked up behind the statue and approached the group of men dressed as Spanish sailors, the words just came out of my mouth. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. As I walked further down the line, I said it again, this time a little louder. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. As I continued walking, I came to the front of the line where a group of men dressed in suits were standing. I repeated myself, making sure they could hear me. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. Suck it up, was the reply I heard as I kept walking. By this time, I'd walked around the statue and reached the front where a small stage had been erected and chairs set up for people to watch the ceremony. It hadn't started yet, but more than half the audience was seated, waiting for it to begin. So I stopped near the center, turned toward the crowd, and in a calm but loud voice, I said to the people, you cannot discover lands already inhabited. That process is known as stealing, conquering, or colonizing. The fact that America calls what Columbus did discovery reveals the implicit racial bias of the country, that Native Americans are not fully human. Quickly, one of the white men dressed in a suit walked over and interrupted me. You are not welcome here, he said as he grabbed my arm and began walking me away. I attempted to explain the inappropriateness of both celebrating this holiday as well as hosting this ceremony, but instead of engaging in conversation, he threatened me with arrest and escorted me from the area. As I walked away from the gathering, I was amused at his words and the irony of their context. A white man participating in a public ceremony honoring Christopher Columbus as the discoverer of America, telling a native man he was not welcome in that space. How did a flawed assumption about the place of the indigenous population in U.S. society become normative? How are assumptions so deeply ingrained in the American psyche and imagination that dysfunctional and oppressive actions emerge? How did a dysfunctional idea and worldview form that allows for the displacement of native bodies? One of the explanations for the formation of this dysfunctional worldview is the doctrine of discovery. The doctrine of discovery is a set of legal principles that govern the European colonizing powers, particularly during the administration of indigenous land, regarding the administration. It is the primary legal precedent that still controls native affairs and rights, and international law formulated in the 15th and 16th centuries. From a theological perspective, the legal and political role of the doctrine of discovery is rooted in a dysfunctional theological imagination that shaped the European colonial settler worldview. The doctrine emerged from a series of 15th century papal bulls, which are official decrees by the Pope that carry the full weight of his ecclesiastical office. On June 18, 1452, Pope Nicholas V issued the papal bull Dum Diversus, which initiated the first set of documents that would compose the doctrine of discovery. The official decree of the Pope granted permission to King Alfonso V of Portugal, quote, to invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens, Muslims, and pagans whatsoever, and other enemies of Christ wheresoever placed, and the kingdoms, dukedoms, principalities, dominions, possessions, and all movable and immovable goods whatsoever, held and possessed by them, and to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, and to apply and appropriate to himself and his successors the kingdoms, dukedoms, counties, principalities, dominions, possessions, and goods, and to convert them to his or their use and profit. End of quote from Pope Nicholas's papal bull of 1452. Dum diversas would identify the Saracens, a common term for Muslims at the time, and pagans, essentially identifying any non-Christians as others, as those who could be targeted for, quote, perpetual slavery. The papal bull intentionally used language that identified those outside the European Christian world and enforced the Western theological imagination of non-Europeans as other. The Portuguese took these ecclesiastical statements to heart and perpetrated the slave trade from the African continent to the European and the American continents. As a Christian ruler, the King of Portugal would have power endowed from the church to take possession of the other as slave labor from the continent of Africa. The pagan African body was just another commodity to be taken for the pleasure and profit of the European Christian body, the one made most fully in the image of God. In the January of 1454, Pope Nicholas authored another bull. The book is Unsettling Truths. We have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who are regular supporters of our program, and the essence of it is, I use a couple of examples. There's hundreds of them out there. In one case, Alabama is preparing to execute a man who was not guilty of the crime that he committed with a relatively high level of certainty, but still they're gonna kill this guy, an African American. And the other story out of New York State, where the police officers hogtied this guy, arms, elbows behind him, tied his legs together, and then threw him down a flight of stairs, mangled his face. He looked he was totally beaten. 12 hours later, he commits suicide in his cell. How is it possible that our prisons do this kind of stuff? Because the 13th Amendment says that slavery is still legal in the United States. You have no rights if you've been convicted of a crime. We need to amend the Constitution. Check it out at thomhartmann.com.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Well, greetings from shelter in place at home, Portland. Thom Hartmann here with you. It's Monday, and our quote for the day from Franklin Roosevelt. Caught it on one of the shows over the weekend. It was, I think it might have been Fareed Zakaria. Anyway, courage is not the absence of fear, but rather the assessment that something else is more important than fear. FDR. We've got a lot to talk about today. First of all, the Mad King Donald, who thinks that if only 100,000 Americans die, he's done a great job. I mean, I'm just boggled that the media is not dealing with this. Like, say what? I mean, the numbers are completely different all around the world. I mean, you've got 3,000 people dead in China. You've got 300 people, fewer than 300 people dead in South Korea. They've got this thing under control. And in Italy now, it's over 10,000. And in Spain, they're having a crisis, but it's not 100,000 dead people. And, some of the estimates are that, because Trump did nothing for 2 months or longer when he knew what was coming and he knew what was going to happen, and he still hasn't shut down the red states. And he's diverting ventilators away from blue states down to Florida. Ron DeSantis gets all he wants. He still hasn't shut down his state, to the best of my knowledge. And he had the beaches open for holiday. I mean, it's just insane. So anyhow, I want to talk about that. Marc Scribner is going to be here in our second hour. He's with the Competitive Enterprise Institute. He's going to explain to us why we shouldn't be relying on government to help us. We should be relying on the charity of billionaires and big corporations. That's going to be interesting. Of course, that's the Competitive Enterprise Institute's shtick. And in our third hour, Alex Lawson, our old friend from Social Security Works, guy who fills in for me from time to time, is going to drop by and talk about the stimulus bill, or whatever you want to call this thing, and what its impact is going to be with regard to Social Security. And that's not just for people who are currently retired, but also, is the Social Security tax suspension that's in that bill going to hurt the program long term so that younger people will not have, for retirement, what older people have? And so, anyhow, that's pretty much, what we're going to be talking about today, although I've got some great geeky science stuff for you, and there's a lot in the news, just in general, a lot of general other news. But over the weekend, I was, reading history. I want to get into some George Washington history today as well. But there's this story, it's 4,000 years old. It's called the Epic of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh was the first king who built the first city-state in what we now call Iraq. It was called Ur back then, and the city was Uruk. And the northern Iraq was covered with cedar forests 4,000 years ago. And Gilgamesh went into those forests and cut them down and used that wood to build his giant city, this massive city. Now, in the story, the Epic of Gilgamesh, is that the god of the forest, Humbuba, was really upset about Gilgamesh coming to cut down the forest, tried to stop him, and Gilgamesh cut his head off, killed him, and then took out the forest. And in revenge for this, now Gilgamesh not only built this city, but he also built a massive irrigation system, moving the water out of the Euphrates River so that they could have, you know, hundreds of thousands of acres of barley. Turns out if you irrigate crops like that over and over and over the same way, without, you know, changing your patterns of growth and irrigation, the soil just starts accumulating more and more salt. And in legend, this was the punishment by the gods for Gilgamesh cutting Humbuba's head off, was that their fields were, quote, turned to white. That was the description of one of the people who was alive at the time. And so if Gilgamesh's epic was to be written today, right, if we were to write a, you know, someday, you know, 1,000 years from now, people are going to look back on this point in history, or hundreds of years from now, and say, oh, that was a consequential turning point in the history of the human race. So here's what I think the story would go like. The people of Earth pulled out of the depths of the planet its blood, ancient sunlight that had been stored by plants in the form of fossil fuels, and they burned it to power a great civilization, just like Gilgamesh did with the trees. The people burned so much ancient sunlight into the sky that the atmosphere began to die. People were dying in plagues of cancer and asthma. But these warnings from the earth were ignored. The gods protecting the earth warned us by beginning a great warming, changing the face of Arctic regions and bringing extreme floods and droughts and wildfires to the planet, and those warnings were ignored too. So the gods said, we must stop humankind from poisoning our Mother Earth. Let us send a plague that will strike dead their wise elders and brokers of political power. Surely that will get their attention and cause them to cease their violence against us. So they sent the Queen of Disease, wearing her royal crown, to aid Mother Earth. The people called her Corona, and she struck down the elders, sickening the rest of the people and only sparing the young. It was to remind them of the Passover story, of the plague of the firstborn, of the warnings that were not heeded, that there would be death and wailing and gnashing of teeth. In response, the people sheltered in place, and the great cities of earth became quiet. They realized with horror how the false god of neoliberalism, had destroyed their resilience and their ability to care for each other solely to enrich a handful of oligarchs. It's as if Gaia herself designed the coronavirus. All across the planet, carbon-burning industrial and transportation activity have ground to a near halt while pollution levels have collapsed. So much oil is not being burned that countries in the world are running out of places to store it. They literally are all over the planet. And the one industry that is thriving right now, the internet, was the first industry to embrace being carbon-free. In some distant time, the story of how arrogant King Trump caused the gods to turn against us with his lies and procrastination, and millions died. And is that story, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, going to be about how, a sick and twisted mad king destroyed his people? Or will it be the story of humanity accepting the warning, turning its back on twisted, evil leaders, and stopping poisoning the earth? Ultimately, that choice is ours. I wrote this piece over the weekend that I was just more or less sharing with you. I'll let you know when it's published. So China, as of today, has 3,306 deaths. The Republic of Korea, that's South Korea, has 152. Now, why is it that South Korea has only 152 deaths and we've passed 2,000? because immediately on January 20th, they had the first diagnosed case in South Korea. So did we here in the United States, both of them on January 20th. And South Korea went into absolute active mode. Within a week, they had testing kits out. They had tested thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of their citizens within a month. They quarantined people. They did contact tracing. They buttoned this down. And this is a democratic country. This is a republic, just like ours. They did not violate civil rights to do this. Donald Trump, throughout that period, that 2-month period, was lying to the American people, as was Fox News and the Murdoch oligarchy. Lachlan and Rupert Murdoch, their company, Fox News, and Hannity and Ingram and all these people, they all lied to us. And lied to their own viewers, who are probably dying in larger numbers than viewers of MSNBC and CNN, who took this seriously from the beginning. I mean, these numbers are just mind-boggling. Italy and Spain, I got to tell you about Spain, too, why Spain is melting down. It has to do with neoliberalism. Believe it or not, what a surprise. Yeah, the neoliberals gutted the Spanish healthcare system in 2011 when a conservative prime minister was elected. I'll tell you about that after the break. Stick around.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with your calls and the news of the day in just a few minutes. And welcome back, David in Spotswood, New Jersey. Hey, David, what's on your mind today? Thanks for watching us on YouTube. What's up?
Oh, hey, I wanted to call in, just delineate that states and localities aren't like the federal government. They can't issue state bonds ad nauseum. And
right, and they can't print money either.
Right, you can't print money. And Cuomo said that a state that doesn't even have a pension problem, has a conservative balanced budget, is running out of money. Right. And that the federal government isn't giving them enough money to run things. I don't know why the mainstream media isn't pointing this out, but I mean, states like New Jersey and Connecticut have pension liability problems. Buying the bonds isn't enough. They only have a limited supply. They could actually be defaulted.
Well, they can't sell bonds right now. The bond market has collapsed. The municipal bonds are totally in the crapper right now. They literally can't sell bonds.
Right, and I'm saying I don't know why it's not being reported. He could literally run out of money and then have to make hard choices.
Yeah, well, that's what's going to. David, you're spot on. Number one, number two, you've absolutely identified a real crisis, and number three, it's going to get a hell of a lot worse. People are talking about a recession. We are sliding into a depression, and it's going to be a depression that might be worse than the Great Depression of the 1930s, the 1929 through the 1930s, the last Republican Great Depression. And it is going to demand a lot of very, very difficult choices. You're absolutely right. David, thanks for the call. Barbara in Sun City, Arizona. Hey, Barbara, what's up?
Hi. I was doing a little research and I came across something called the Dunning-Kruger effect. People are going, why is he doing this? What does he do? He's crazy. He's all these different disorders. But this one really kind of nailed it. And it's called Dunning-Kruger. It's a cognitive bias in which people believe that they are smarter and more capable than they really are. And it's usually amongst people who are, dumb, stupid. And they are constantly trying to prove that they are superior to everybody else. So if you contradict them, they're right. And they're going to change. They're going to just keep getting pushed. And that's what he's doing. I mean, he's got all these other disorders, but this one really shows that he's the only one who is right and everybody else is stupid when he's stupid and everybody else is right and you can't point it out to them. It's a actual psychological defect, and it's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, and you can look it up. Very well mined, and it's on Wikipedia. And it's dangerous, and so dangerous. Criminals often are, even Darwin talked about it. Ignorance more frequently begets confidence than does knowledge in the descent of man. I mean, this guy should just be taken out for mental illness, and the rest of them.
Yeah, it's a good time to invoke the 25th Amendment.
You know?
Yeah. Well, and I don't think he's the only person suffering from this. I think that, Larry Kudlow, you could probably put him in that camp. I don't know about Mike Pence, but, a number of these people who are, particularly these libertarian advisors. Spot on, Barbara. Thank you for the call, and thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV there in Sun City. We'll be right back. It is coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. We have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who are regular supporters of our program, and the essence of it is, I use a couple of examples. There's hundreds of them out there. In one case, Alabama is preparing to execute a man who was not guilty of the crime that he committed with a relatively high level of certainty, but still they're gonna kill this guy, an African American. And the other story out of New York State, where the police officers hogtied this guy, arms, elbows behind him, tied his legs together, and then threw him down a flight of stairs, mangled his face. He looked he was totally beaten. 12 hours later, he commits suicide in his cell. How is it possible that our prisons do this kind of stuff? Because the 13th Amendment says that slavery is still legal in the United States. You have no rights if you've been convicted of a crime. We need to amend the Constitution. Check it out at thomhartmann.com. Student debt that was issued by the federal government, we would just eat it as a country. They were the victims of fraud. Well, it turns out Betsy DeVos had other ideas. She came into office, of course, just months afterwards, as Donald Trump was sworn into office, and she's been fighting it all the way. You can check the whole thing out over at thomhartmann.com and our new video for supporters of our program. So Donald Trump holds his daily reality show on TV. Yesterday, bragging about how his ratings are great and the networks are lying scum, basically, but they have to carry his show because he's got better ratings than Celebrity Apprentice. He's moved from talking to his rallies, 1,000, 2,000 people, to talking to millions of people every day via his new ego post, which is these press conferences. And it's causing some real serious soul searching in the media because he's blowing out lies, and it's basically a campaign speech every day. Every day he figures out a way to vilify blue states and their governors and praise red states and their governors and praise himself and blame others, literally every day. And a lot of it is lies, just plain old flat out lies. Yesterday he said, how do you go from using 10,000 to 20,000 masks to 300,000? This was yesterday in the Rose Garden. He says, something's going on. Where are the masks going? Are they going out the back door? Right. These hospitals in New York have a profitable black market mask business going on outside the back door of the hospital, while their nurses and doctors are getting sick and some of them are dying. This man is sick and twisted. This is just insane. The 911 system in the city is absolutely overwhelmed. On Thursday, he went on Fox News on Sean Hannity's show, and he says, I don't believe you need 30 or 40,000 ventilators. You go in a major hospital, sometimes you'll have two ventilators, and all of a sudden you're saying, can we order 30,000 ventilators? People are going to die because of this kind of rhetoric and because of the Fox News lies for months. Fox News was lying to their viewers. For months, right-wing hate radio was lying to their listeners. And for months, Donald Trump was lying to the nation. And now, yesterday, he said, if only 100,000 people, keep in mind, in China, it's 3,000 people have died. In South Korea, it's only 300 people have died. And they had their first case the exact same day we did. And Trump is saying, well, if only 100,000 people die, I did a pretty good job. Really? If Trump had done what South Korea did at the same time South Korea did, we might only have a few thousand deaths nationwide when this hits its peak. Instead of the 100,000 that Trump is saying is acceptable, and the 2 million that Yale University and a college in the UK are suggesting is possible. I mean, it's simple math. If 1% of the people who get this disease die from it, and 1/3 of America gets the disease, which is, by the way, about what happens in flu season, and we have a vaccine against flu. You get about 20 to 25% of Americans get the flu every year. You take the vaccine out of the equation, it'd probably be, 30 to 40, maybe even 50%. So if only 1% of Americans, fewer than 1/3 of Americans get coronavirus, that's 100 million people. 1% of 100 million people is 1 million people. If 2/3 of America get it, that's 2 million people dead. And Trump is saying, oh, well, it's all good. And now the Washington Post is reporting that back on February 5th, this is 2 weeks after we had our first case here in the United States and Trump did nothing and went on TV and lied and said it was a Democrat hoax. On February 5th, Alex Azar, the Health and Human Services Secretary, asked the Trump administration to insert a $2 billion emergency fund into the budget that was going forward, specifically for protective equipment, personal protective equipment for people, frontline workers. He was getting briefings. He knew what was going on, Alex Azar. He asked for $2 billion in emergency funding. The administration refused. Trump said no. And now you have, Florida, which is headed by, reliable Trump sycophant, this is from Hunter over at Daily Kos. Florida, is run by Ron DeSantis and represented by Rick Scott in the Senate, the guy whose company committed the largest Medicare fraud in the history of the United States. He's still refusing to issue any of these measures. Ron DeSantis down in Florida is getting anything he wants from the federal government. Massachusetts has only received 17% of their requested supplies. Maine, about 5%. Colorado, enough for 1 day only. The outbreak is growing rapidly in Colorado. And as I mentioned earlier, Spain, where nearly 5,000 people have died. Keep in mind, Trump says 100,000 in America is just fine. He's doing a great job. In 2011, Spain elected Mariano Rajoy, R-A-J-O-Y, as prime minister. He was conservative. And he started by slashing $10 billion out of the hospitals and Medicare. So, they've got single-payer health, Medicare for all there. He slashed $10 billion. $10 billion is an enormous amount of money for a country the size of Spain. And he kept up that austerity program for much of his tenure. Spending in the healthcare sector dropped from 6.8% of GDP to 5.9%. The average across the EU is 7.5% of GDP.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Which meant before the coronavirus hit Spain, they already had a shortage of hospital beds, and there was a wave of privatization that was closing hospitals in Spain. Neoliberalism, ain't it wonderful?
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Fred Kaplan's new book, The Bomb: Presidents, Generals, and the Secret History of Nuclear War. This is from the introduction. For 30 years after the Cold War ended, almost no one thought, much less worried, about nuclear war. Now almost everyone is fearful. But the fear takes the form of a vaguely paralyzed anxiety. Because of the long reprieve from the bomb's shadow, few people know how to grasp its dimensions. They've forgotten, if they ever knew. The holiday from history began on August 8th, 2017, when President Donald Trump, barely 6 months in office, told reporters at his golf resort in Bedminster, New Jersey, that if the North Koreans kept threatening the United States with harsh rhetoric and missile tests, quote, they will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen, end quote. Even those who didn't remember President Harry Truman's similar description 72 years earlier of the atomic bomb that destroyed Hiroshima, Truman said, "A rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth." It was clear that in language more bellicose than any president since the end of World War II, Trump was talking about launching nuclear weapons at North Korea. Not if its leader, Kim Jong-un, first attacked the United States, but merely if he developed the ability to do so. Then, 6 months later, Trump signed and released his administration's Nuclear Posture Review, a 74-page document that called for building new types of nuclear weapons and integrating them with the military's conventional war plans. In short, for treating nuclear weapons as normal. The red lights flashed. The alarm bells rang furiously. Yet here is what few recognized. None of these notions were new. The president himself seemed a departure from the norm. His character, erratic, eruptive, thin-skinned, willfully uninformed, a combustive mix for a world leader with his finger on the button. But the button and everything around it were the same. In those decades when most of us chose to forget the bomb, as global tensions calmed and fallout shelters crumbled and we turned our gaze to other problems and pleasures, the nuclear war machine continued to rumble forth in the beyond top-secret chambers of the Pentagon, the Strategic Command Headquarters in Omaha, the weapons labs in various parts of the country, and the think tanks whose denizens never stopped thinking about the unthinkable. They all kept at their singular task, wrestling with the dilemmas posed by the bomb's existence. How to deter nuclear war? How to fight a nuclear war if it cannot be deterred? How to win it, if such a thing is even possible. This is the nature of the nuclear era, and the era never drifted into suspension, even if our attention did. Trump snapped us out of our slumber, reminded those of us who were old enough to know, and informed those who weren't, that the bomb is still here. In public over the years, officers and officials have described America's nuclear policy as a second strike deterrence. If an enemy strikes us with nuclear weapons, we will retaliate in kind. This retaliatory power is what deters the enemy from attacking us. In reality, though, American policy has always been to strike first preemptively, or in response to a conventional invasion of Allied territory, or to a biological or large-scale cyber attack. In any case, not just as an answer to nuclear attack. All of these options envision firing nuclear weapons at military targets for military ends. They envision the bomb as a weapon of war writ large. This vision has been enshrined in the American military's doctrines, drills, and exercises from the onset of the nuclear era through all its phases. Most presidents have been skeptical of this vision, morally, strategically, practically, but none of them have rejected it. Some have threatened to launch nuclear weapons first as a way of settling a crisis. The few who considered adopting a no first use policy, in the end, decided against it. There are rationales for these doctrines, drills, and exercises, and for the retention of the first use option. They are driven by policies, personalities, and bureaucratic rivalries, but also by a logic which, once its premises are accepted, hurls its adherents and the rest of us into a rabbit hole of increasingly bizarre scenarios that seem increasingly, if strangely, rational the deeper they're probed. Understanding the nuclear era, the era of our lifetime, means understanding the rabbit hole, who dug it, and how we got stuck inside. It means tracing the maze of its tunnels, which is to say the arc of its history. A story enmeshed in secrecy, some of it still secret, much of it now illuminated by declassified documents and interviews with key actors, though never fully told. How did we get to this second coming of nuclear panic? How did we wind up with thousands of nuclear weapons, far more than any war aims could justify? What propelled the nuclear arms race during the decades-long Cold War? And what happened to the weapons and their guardians after the Cold War ended? And how and why did any of this persist? This is the Thom Hartmann Book Club, the book Fred Kaplan's The Bomb. That the threat of such land transfer was an existential one. This Land by Christopher Ketchum.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Ron DeSantis apparently is finally saying, stay home. This is pathetic. This is absolute. Well, it's criminal, frankly. I mean, it's just wrong what is happening. And Trump politicizing disaster aid and all that kind of stuff, it's just crazy. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind?
Hey, not too much, Tom. Hey, you had a caller earlier that mentioned Dunning-Kruger effect, and I know you've talked about it because I've heard you, and I talked about it before Trump was even elected because I think that's how Russian intelligence identified as Donald Trump as being, able. They could manipulate him. But the problem is with the whole Dunning-Kruger theory is it's really just temporary, especially when you're seeking objectives against a country like America, where we have we have a corporate system, we have layers upon layers of advisors. Okay, in Russia, usually their pattern, from my experience in the past, their pattern is they don't really expend a lot of resources on temporary measures, on temporary objectives. Okay, and they would have to expend a lot of resources to manipulate a president, but nonetheless, it's probably true. Okay,
I don't think they'd have to spend a lot of resources if that president is, literally owes his existence and his empire to billionaire oligarchs in Russia and some of the countries, on its borders. I think then it becomes very easy to basically threaten to stop backstopping his $1 trillion in loans with Deutsche Bank, and watch him go down in flames. Trump is obviously terrified of this.
Well, perhaps, and also let me connect it to some things that are currently going on. Nonetheless, I think it is true. Trump does have a Dunning-Kruger pattern. He thinks he's a lot smarter than he actually is, and I think that's why we're at where we're at. Because I know for a fact Donald Trump was briefed on this pandemic. Okay, I mean, any dialogue to the contrary, I just kind of ignore because I know for a fact.
Back when
he was briefed on? Oh, I mean,
December, January,
probably. Yeah, yeah, definitely. Like I told you before, I figured it out in December. And I'm sure that, this is an ongoing thing. We've been tracking pandemics for a long time. I mean, it's a very well-established thing, okay, since World War II, for crying out loud, for the most part. But anyways, the problem is Donald Trump probably ignored it, okay? I mean, because of the Dunning-Kruger effect. I mean, it was something that just was outside his perception, okay? He just ignored it. And I think what we're doing is we're defaulting back to military measures. And what I mean by that is I saw the same thing in Iraq during the surge, all right? And Steve Mnuchin is about to do microloans, what we call microloans in Iraq. Now, simultaneously to alleviate, financial stress in Iraq, okay, and to rebuild the country, we gave out microloans to businesses and small businesses, all right? Then simultaneously, we cut off medical care. We cut off the wheelchair program, the crutches, everything, exams, all that stuff. If a sick Iraqi wandered up to an American operating base, we directed them back into town. They had to go see a local doctor. Okay, now this had tremendous effects. All right, adverse effects that nobody really talks about. All right, and I see the same pattern in America. I think they just defaulted back to nation building, but they're nation building here at home. And in this, like I said, cutting people off of medical support in Iraq, even though there was no epidemic, had tremendous adverse effects. All right, and not only that,
I get it. Well, Dave, what's your point?
Well, my point is we need to be aware of this sort of thing so we can avoid, becoming victims of nation building here in America. The same thing.
I agree totally. Dave, I got to move along, but I agree totally. Thank you. Ann in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Hey, Ann, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Perfect segue. I think what we're experiencing is a form of political genocide. Genocide, definition, the deliberate killing of a large group of people, especially those of a particular ethnic group or nation, and I would add, or political affiliation, based on the way Trump is releasing medical aid to states based on whether they're blue or red. I think that's, whether it's conscious or not, this is a form of political genocide.
Yeah, in fact, Trump genocide was one of the top trending hashtags on Twitter over the weekend.
No kidding.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with you. I think that, Trump lied and procrastinated, but mostly lied. Don't worry, it's just a hoax. It's going to go away. It'll magically disappear. We only have one case. We've got to tighten, button down. It's nearly airtight, said Larry Kudlow. These guys lied, and now they're predicting that 100,000 Americans will die. I think it's going to be a hell of a lot higher than that. And pretty soon we're going to, on this show, we're going to have people calling in and saying, my husband just died, my wife just died, my friend next door just died. I expect to see it in my neighborhood. I've got neighbors who are in their 60s who have been out partying because they've been watching Fox News, not just here, but I mean all around. And it's just, this is terrible. This is terrible. And thank you. Excellent point. Thank you very much. Richard in Clatskanie, Oregon. Hey, Richard, what's up?
I was wondering whether any of your listeners or you have any idea where the NBC warfare equipment, personal protective gear, is at. We've been collecting personal protective gear for the military since the 50s. Nobody said anything about how many millions of pieces of protective equipment the military has.
Yeah, I don't really know, Richard, but I do know back in February, Trump shipped, I believe it was 18 tons of personal protective equipment from the United States to China in February. When he was saying this is just a hoax and don't worry, it ain't going to happen here, he shipped tons of personal protective equipment to China. Look it up. It's just an amazing story. Thank you for the call, Richard. Marty in Evergreen Park, Illinois. Hey, Marty, what's up? Thanks for watching us on YouTube.
Thank you so much for. Thank you. Thank you so much for taking my call. I just wanted to ask you, the listening audience, for thoughts and prayers for my dad, who's currently fighting a COVID-19 infection in an ICU at a local hospital here. He's got a lot of mitigating factors that make him a real high risk. So we're all really, trying to keep as good vibes going as we can. But, if somebody wants the thought I was going to share with you, if somebody wants a really good business idea, somebody should be helping patients set up like some kind of video camera systems or whatever, so that they can chat with other loved ones. It seems to be like a problem that a lot of families are having, communicating with with ones in the hospital, since nobody's allowed to have any visits. But they have those spark boards, those other video conference systems all in one. But I'm just saying, I'm sure if somebody would be helping a lot of these patients, see their loved ones.
Well, Marty, one of the things. Louise and I have two friends who down in Texas who have coronavirus right now. They're on the back end of it. They're young. I mean, they're very young people, and it really knocked one of them down badly. But they seem to be recovering. But they never went to the hospital. There was one night where one of them was starting to freak out, thinking that she couldn't breathe. But they ultimately did not go to the hospital. But what my understanding is from the accounts that I've read of people who have been hospitalized is that if you are, the only way a hospital will take you in is if you're really, really sick. And when you're really, really, you're way too out of it to use, a cell phone or a computer to chat with people. That seems to be the big problem. I don't know, what your father's experiencing. I'm so sorry to hear that he's in the hospital.
Right now he's still able to have coherent conversations. I mean, he's hard of hearing and has high blood pressure, all the risk factors that you would not want to have and catch this, pretty much apply to him. But it just seems to be a challenge that we're having right now. And I just wonder if other, people in similar situations are experiencing the same thing, and if that's a problem.
I think people are using. Yeah, people are using Skype and Zoom. I mean, over the weekend, there's a group of us who worked with the Salem International Relief Organization out of Germany for years, and we had a Skype conference call this weekend with a bunch of people from Scotland and England and a couple of people here in the United States, one in Colorado, one in Ohio, and me. And, we're talking with our kids here about having virtual meals where, we'll bring up Skype or Zoom on our end, and they'll bring up Skype or Zoom on their end, and we'll just set the computer, behind our plates and, with the camera facing us, and so we can see the screen, and Louise and I will sit side by side, and our daughter and her husband would sit side by side on their end, and so we're looking at each other, and we'll just have a meal together. I'm actually looking forward to doing that. We're all gonna. In fact, a bunch of us, we've got 3 kids and they all live here in this area, but we can't, have contact with them right now. But we're all talking about doing that next weekend. So I think that there's a lot of that kind of stuff going on. Louise has been FaceTiming with our grandson, virtually every day, sometimes 2 or 3 times a day when he wants to talk to his grandma. So, it's there. The equipment is there. The technology is there.
Oh, absolutely. But those who are more technically challenged might have, issues getting that all set up. So that's awesome.
Yeah. Apple's FaceTime is remarkably easy. Marty, thanks a lot for the call. And I wish you the very best. I wish your father the very, very best. Tough stuff. This is a tough time we're in. This is an historic time. I'll tell you about George Washington in the next hour. We'll be right back. It's 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. Stick around. And welcome back. Robbie in Portland. Are you going to make me hang up on you again, Robbie?
I just want to talk about some facts, but I actually really liked your Gilgamesh story with the Queen Corona.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, that was actually, and something that I wanted to bring up that's been on my mind. You said it killed all the wise or the elders or the older people. What's really fascinating about Corona, you described, 2 people in Texas, but look at how many world leaders and generals and military people who contracted Corona. Rand Paul, all the people from the CPAC meeting, and Senator Ted Cruz had to isolate himself because he was exposed. Israel was actually the epicenter, but Iranian generals. This affected a lot of government leaders. You know what I'm talking about?
Netanyahu's being isolated right now, yeah.
So what I wanted to bring up was,
the older people. I mean, this is the problem as it rips through the military, is it's going to take out the senior command.
So did you know that there was actually in 2019, there was the Wuhan held the military Olympics? All the world military came to Wuhan, China in 2019.
I am not. Cool. Okay, I'm not going to go down that road, Robbie. I'm sorry. You did make me hang up on you. Johnny in Galveston, Texas. Hey, Johnny, what's on your mind today?
Can you hear me, Tom? I didn't hear the
Yeah, I do hear. Yeah, I hear you fine, Johnny.
Okay. Well, it was scary enough that my neighbors 2 doors down have hosted large backyard parties this past weekend and the weekend before. And then I hear you in your neighborhood. I would think that they would be a little bit more enlightened up there in Oregon, and they're having social gatherings too.
Hey, Fox News reaches every corner of this country. That's that right-wing hate radio is everywhere. So, and they're all telling people this is not that big a deal. They'll start telling people it's a big deal when it starts working its way down to the red states, down to the rural areas. That's when they're going to start freaking out and going, oh, my God.
Yeah, when I talk to my Republican neighbors about what I put as the source, where I put the blame for our various economic and related problems like coronavirus, I blame the Republican Party, GOP austerity, enabled by unfettered, underregulated Wild West capitalism. I never mention neoliberalism because I think that would be too confusing, and that would lend into their worldview, liberal, it's the liberals again. So why is it that you don't say GOP austerity?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I'll start. I'll think about that. I think we need to come up with a word that's better than neoliberalism. But I'm with you. Thanks a lot, Johnny, for the call. Sally in in Lake City, Florida. Excuse me. Hey, Sally, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Thanks for all you do, man. You said something Friday on your show that concerned me, and I was in another room, and I didn't hear it all. And the gist of it, you were saying something about the electoral votes. The Republicans cancel the primaries in some states, and it goes to Congress. Right. Each state gets a vote. Can you repeat what you said about that? And then he's reelected.
Yeah, I wrote an op-ed about this a couple of weeks ago that you can find over at HartmannReport.com, and it was titled something like, how Trump can remain president even if he loses the vote. And basically the way it works, Sally, is that if there are not 50% plus one electoral votes for one candidate or the other, if some of the states basically don't hold elections or are unable to certify their elections because of the coronavirus, then the vote goes to the House of Representatives where each state has a vote. And 33 or 34 states are Republican controlled. They will reelect Donald Trump. And I know that the Republicans are talking about this right now. Sally, thank you for the call. Hey, did you know that Hillary Clinton actually won Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Florida in the 2016 election? It's on page 92 of my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting. Welcome back. It's 10 minutes before the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you. In the next hour, we're going to get into George Washington and smallpox and epidemics. We're going to hear from the Competitive Enterprise Institute about why government shouldn't be involved in helping us out. I want to talk about the Nordic way to rescue economies. We've got a whole pile of stuff to get to as we continue through our program. Kenyatta in Los Angeles. Hey, Kenyatta, what's up?
How are you, Mr. Hartmann?
I am great, but I'll get better, hopefully. Knock wood.
I'm good. I'm glad to hear that. Well, I'm one of those people in the risk group, so I'm a little concerned, but I try to continue doing what I need to do. I wanted to mention something that really is concerning me. The greatest man in my life was my dad. And in a couple of months, we'll be coming up on the 22nd anniversary of his death. And I remember his funeral as though it was yesterday. And one of the things that's really concerning me, and I'm not hearing a lot about it in the media, in fact, nothing, is that I don't know if folks are aware, Tom, that funerals are banned. And it's not like, if you're going to get married, you can put off a wedding. Normally, if there's a normal birth, mother's home in a couple of days, people can weather that couple of days and see the baby when he gets home. But funerals are something that, people die for all kinds of reasons, not just COVID. I mean, life goes on. People die in car accidents. They have heart attacks. And I just wonder if the American public is understanding that, God forbid, you lose a child or a parent, you can't say goodbye to them. And it really has bothered me, and I don't know why. Maybe it's because of my dad's death, but I wanted to put that out there. And I did have a second point I wanted to make.
So is it that, I'm sure in the rural parts of America where this virus has not yet at least been detected, that, funeral parlors are still operating just fine, thank you very much. This has to be in the states that have issued bans against public gatherings. I mean, you can't go to a funeral. Do you know if the funeral parlors are starting to do virtual funerals where people can come in on a Zoom link or something?
Well, that's what's happening here in California, because I'm on the West Coast, as you know, just like you are. But, Tom, listen, I know you've lost people in your life close to you. A virtual funeral, I just don't know if people are thinking this through. And that's what I wanted to segue into my second point, Tom. And that's why I think there will be martial law, because just as you mentioned about your neighbors, and you had a caller previously talking about people totally flouting these rules, we have the same thing happening here in Southern California. In fact, Mayor Garcetti and Governor Newsom have every day ratcheted up enforcement. And we have a number of firefighters and police officers that are coming down with this. They've got to be quarantined. As that spreads, you're going to have to bring the military in. And I, if people don't care about their grandparents or the elder people in their lives, they need to be thinking about the fact that if you lose a child in some accident, and I'm not wishing this on anyone, or if you lose a parent or someone close to you, depending on where you are, if you're in New York or California or Washington, you're not going to be able to say goodbye. You're going to go to a Skype funeral.
Yeah. Wow. And the other thing that we're not seeing in the media is these funerals themselves. I mean, there's very little discussion about this. We've got over 2,000 dead people in the United States. We're going to hit, probably in the next day or two, 10 times more dead people than South Korea has. And we got our first patient the same day South Korea did. It's going to amplify from there. It's going to get, the next 2 weeks are going to be really, really grim. But it's going to be the next 2 months. It's going to be at least a couple of months, because Donald Trump did nothing for months. And these guys dithered and fiddled while Rome burned. It is just so wrong.
Donald Trump's stupidity is galactic in nature.
Yeah. Add Dunning-Kruger to that, and you've got a real serious problem. Kenyatta, I want to get one more call in here before the end of the hour. Thanks for your call. It's always great to hear from you. Anthony in Detroit, Michigan. Hey, Anthony, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Just a piece of news I heard this morning on the local radio, which is that our state representative for Detroit named Tremick, he just passed away last night due to COVID, is Isaac Robinson. And it's a shame just because, he was only in his 40s, and he was really progressive, on a bunch of issues that are important. So, yeah, pretty surprising.
We're going to start seeing more and more of this, Anthony. We're going to start seeing names that are familiar to us dying. We've already seen some who are infected and quarantined. The Prime Minister of Canada's wife just came out of quarantine. She seems to have recovered, or she actually had it, but she's better now. But it's going to get rough. It's going to get rough. Anthony, thank you for the call, and thanks for the information. Lou in Fairplay, Colorado. Hey, Lou, what's up?
Hey, good morning, Tom. Hey, I'm actually going to kind of support Mr. Trump's numbers. We don't have good data in the U.S. except the date and the number of dead, but Germany did a real good job of, not overflowing the system. And I think we can use their 0.4% death rate as reasonable while health care can keep up. If we use that number and plot the data, the calculation I come
Well, they're
up
able to
with
do that, Lou, because they're doing nationwide testing, and they're doing in Germany, they're doing nationwide testing. They're doing really aggressive quarantining. One of my best friends is in quarantine in Germany right now, and they don't let you out of the house. And they're very, very serious about it. And their hospital system is, functional and stronger than ours, and it's one of the most modern in Europe. That's why they have, and also they're on the early end of this curve. Let's talk about their death rate in a couple of weeks. But at 0.4%, if 100 million people get it, that's 400,000 dead. So, why is 400,000 dead, or even 100,000 dead, acceptable in the United States when South Korea has, and Trump is bragging about, we've tested more people than South Korea. Well, they're 1/6 our size, but they've only had 200 people dead in the entire period, and they've pretty much stopped their deaths. They're down to just a few every day. Lou, thanks for the call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Black Panthers, Portraits from an Unfinished Revolution, edited by Briasha and Yohuro Williams. This is from Chapter 1, In Defense of Self-Defense, Pathways to the Black Panther Party. People joined the Black Panther Party for many different reasons. The moment of politicization was different for everyone, but a few were commonly shared, including the 1963 bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama, and the 1965 Watts Urban Rebellion. A more general sense of frustration and alienation compelled others to join the Panthers' ranks. The party exerted an enormous pull on the imagination of the members, especially those who had experienced police brutality. In the rebellious spirit of the times, the party's bold stance on self-defense resonated with those seeking fresh alternatives for achieving social justice and black liberation. Party members expressed a deep appreciation for other aspects of the Panthers program, including its community service programs, which grew out of a genuine love for the people. My neighborhood friend, a sister that I've known since I was about 11 years old, said, "Claudia, I want you to go with me. We're going to go and hear these Panthers speak at PS 92, which was an elementary school in our community." I said, "Okay, I'll go, I'm down." I listened to these brothers speak and I heard the pitch. I saw the determination and I saw the compassion. I thought, wow, this is the feeling that I used to get when I went into clubs and popped my fingers and got on the dance floor. It was the same feeling, except it was bigger for me now. It was bigger than me. It was full of love of the people. No longer did we have to argue and fight about, what are you looking at me like that for? Or don't step on my sneaker, or this is my block. Now we really had something to fight for. We had a people to fight for. This is bigger than any gang or club. We had a goal. We had something to look forward to, which was the betterment of black people. It was most definitely something that I was searching for, but I didn't yet know what that I was searching. I didn't find it. It fell on me. That was the first meeting. That's what actually started the wheels in my mind for me to become political. I was rank and file. I did a lot of things. The easiest way to say it is just to imagine worker bees. You got one queen, everyone else works. Rank and file. Those were the worker bees. We did it all. The one thing I enjoyed the most was teaching the political education classes on 7th Avenue in front of the Harlem office. That was the most fruitful. But anything I did, it was for the love of the people. Wherever I was sent, or whatever I had to do, it didn't matter anymore because it was for the love of the people. We were trying to get the word out. If I had to sell 125 papers in a day and I got close to that goal, then I did a good job. I was originally from Queens and came out of the Corona branch of the Black Panther Party. When the Panther 21 were arrested and went to jail, in order to keep those offices open and functioning, Panthers were sent all over the city to Harlem. I was one of the Panthers that ended up in the Harlem branch. That's how I got to be there on Wednesday nights to give the PE classes, the political education classes. I was extremely nervous the first time, but once I found my voice, then it went like clockwork. A lot of the people in the community who were just walking by were like, well, let me stop and see what this little girl is talking about, because I was indeed a little girl at that time. We started off every PE class with a 10-point program, and we ended every PE class with, okay, let me hear from you guys. What do you want to see different in your community, and how are you living? Then we would get the feedback, and then we would know how to concentrate our efforts. Rent strikes were crazy, because if you had to live like that, why should you pay rent? We did clothing drives, we did food drives, we did, of course, the breakfast program. There were a lot of other things that happened, and they might have been more meaningful, but those PE classes stayed with me. We were outside on the street in front of the office. When you were giving a class or you were having a talk inside the office and there were only Panthers around you, the feeling was just different than outside on the street. The Panthers knew what you were doing because they were Panthers and they were doing the same thing. Outside, there were constant questions and answers with the people. You had to give yourself up when you were outside in that crowd. You never knew who was going to say, we don't care about that, we don't care about you, you need to go away. There were a lot of people that just did not know where we were coming from and were afraid that if they were seen in the office or if they were seen asking questions, that they'd get reprisals, that they'd end up getting hurt. They were afraid. Things went so fast. Time seems to accelerate when you're always looking over your shoulder. At this time, it was all-out war against the Panthers, and brothers are being shot down in the street or set up or going to jail for years. We have brothers in jail since that time, 40, 41 years. We've had brothers that we've lost on the inside that we can't let the world forget. The government said, okay, we're going to lock them up and throw away the key and no one will ever care. But it's not true. We want them out. We want freedom for all political prisoners. We don't want any more of them to die on the inside. That's the biggest injustice. There were times when our cadre consisted of almost nothing but women, and that was when the brothers were locked up or had to go underground. I remember being on a front line against a policeman on horseback and being 6 months pregnant. What we wanted was a simple street light, and we got the community out there and we blocked traffic. I didn't know whether I was going to be trampled, my baby killed, but I knew I had to be there. I was an active member of the party from 1968 to 1971, and in those few years, I aged 10, 15 years. We didn't have much time to be little girls. We went straight to womanhood. Talking about these things is bringing up all of these feelings, though I hadn't thought about or touched on them for a long time. It seems that as you get older and you look back on the things that you've done in your life, you say, oh my God, I could have gotten killed then. When you're young, fear is not really in your vocabulary, and once you look back, you wonder, why wasn't I afraid? We didn't have much time to be afraid. It was all about survival. The Black Panthers. Got a new video up for regular supporters of our program over at ThomHartmann.com, and this is about just a totally bizarre story about these three guys with no VA experience, not even veterans, who are all big shots down at Mar-a-Lago, that Donald Trump has put in charge of the Veterans Administration functionally. And their association, one of them is the head of Marvel Entertainment, their association with Johnson & Johnson and the New York Stock Exchange, and Johnson & Johnson, the big drug company, taking this very, very cheap chemical, ketamine, tweaking the molecule a little bit, and rolling it out as a new anti-suicide drug, Spravato, that in clinical trials caused 6 people to die, 3 of them by suicide, and none of the people taking the placebo to die. And now Trump is telling the VA, you have to buy this highly inflated price drug from Johnson & Johnson, and the Democrats want to know what's up with the VA crowd guys. Check it out. It's at ThomHartmann.com.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us is Marc Scribner. He's the Senior Fellow and Transportation Policy Expert with the Competitive Enterprise Institute, a conservative think tank in D.C. CEI.org is their website. His Twitter handle is Marc, M-A-R-C, Scribner, S-C-R-I-B-N-E-R. And Marc, welcome to the program.
Hi, Tom. Thanks for having me on.
You're absolutely welcome, and thank you for dropping by. So I understand that you guys are basically taking the position that the government should not be, that Donald Trump shouldn't be telling General Motors, please make masks or please make respirators. And by the way, because the Defense Production Act requires that the federal government will backstop those manufacturers, that they not experience losses, that we shouldn't be doing that. I'm assuming that that's part of your policy of don't tax the billionaires, don't tax the big corporations. Government shouldn't be doing these things. We should just be trusting in the magic of the free market and the charity of the billionaire class. Do I have that right?
Well, no, you don't have it right. And if you actually look at what the memo that Trump put out on Friday and say what it says, it applies only to General Motors. Now, the important thing there to know is that General Motors is a contract producer under this for Ventec, which actually manufactures these products. And if you think about what they're doing right now is they're attempting to retrofit a Kokomo, Indiana plant that makes semiconductors to make this special type of ventilator that was only approved less than 3 years ago by the FDA. Typical production of those ventilators by Ventec is about 200 a month. And they're trying to scale right now to 20,000 a month. Nothing that the government did, nothing that the President Trump did is going to increase that number. They've yet to even start producing them because they're working around the clock trying to figure out.
Right. They said it'll be the end of April.
Scale. Right. Yeah, they're hoping to ship several thousand by the end of April.
So is your point that this use of the Defense Production Act was just basically a PR stunt by Trump? Is that it?
Yeah, I think that the president wanted to send a message, unclear exactly what message, but he wanted to send a message that he's doing something. But saying, even if you think about this, even if you think that the Defense Production Act would be a useful tool in this setting, why does the order only apply to General Motors, which is producing these only under the direct supervision and direction of Ventec? The order doesn't apply to Ventec. So even trying to sort of conceptualize this, what is the president doing? It's hard to make sense of how this could possibly help.
Well, that's interesting. It's rare you and I end up on the same, or CEI anyway, and I end up on the same side of an argument. But this is what I think the narrative probably was. Donald Trump every morning wakes up and says to himself, how can I catch the headlines? He's got to have his name above the fold in every newspaper in America, and his name has got to be the first sentence uttered in every newscast in America, for better or for worse, because he knows that, what P.T. Barnum said. In fact, one time he was asked, this is during the primary, he was asked, who's your favorite author and what's your favorite book? And he said, P.T. Barnum. I didn't know that P.T. Barnum had written a book, but I went out and bought a copy of it. It was a little self-help book, kind of a Dale Carnegie book. And Donald Trump, P.T. Barnum. And P.T. Barnum famously said, I don't care what they say about me, just so long as they spell my name right. There's literally no such thing as bad publicity. And Trump does that every day. So one day, one of the days, his technique to grab the news cycle was to sign the Defense Production Act as if he was doing something. But then he actually didn't invoke it. He didn't do anything. And from what I'm seeing of the executive order, he's still not actually invoking the Defense Production Act, because that would involve backstopping General Motors. Instead, he's basically what used to be called jawboning them. He's basically saying, do it. And I think, frankly, he's doing it to grab a second news cycle. But during that time, General Motors had been working with Ventec independent of Donald Trump.
Right, exactly. And that's, I think that's what's so frustrating to a lot of the folks involved. The president invoked the Defense Production Act, as you mentioned, sort of half invoked it, and then aimed at one company involved in this very complex supply chain that is fast evolving, because they're having to do what typically takes months or even years in matters of days or weeks. And everything, and that's why you're seeing these kind of staid responses from GM and Ventec saying, well, we're doing everything we were doing before this order, and we don't plan on changing course. But I do think you're right. I think the president, or at least someone close to him, wanted him to try to grab credit when they're really, this latest action from him isn't going to magically produce more ventilators, isn't going to magically retool a automotive semiconductor plant faster. It's not going to do any of those things he seems to suggest is doing. And I think part of it, he lashed out at GM CEO Mary Barra, and I just got the impression that there's some kind of personality thing at its core here. He doesn't like the CEO right now.
He doesn't like
kind of
powerful women.
Over into policy, into this emergency policy.
Yeah, he strongly dislikes women who have power. I mean, there's a long pattern of that. And Mary Barra, the CEO of General Motors, is a woman with extraordinary power. And, just like he went after Gretchen Whitmer. I mean, another woman governor. He just referred to her as that woman from Michigan. This is bizarre. I didn't realize that the Competitive Enterprise Institute had become Never Trumpers.
Well, I call things like I see them, and I think that's the CEI position. We're nonpartisan. And if we see a politician of whatever party behaving badly, we're going to call them on it as we see it.
Yeah. Well, it's a fascinating perspective here, Marc, and I thank you very much for coming on the program and talking about it.
Hey, thank you again for having me, Tom.
My pleasure. Marc Scribner, he's with the Competitive Enterprise Institute. CEI.org is the website. You can tweet him at Marc, M-A-R-C, Scribner, on the Twitter machine. So let's see here. Hartmut in Kennesaw, Georgia. Hey, Hartmut, what's up? You wanted to talk about, we had a caller earlier talking about mortality rates in Germany.
Yeah, well, I for the past 2 weeks, I've been following a website by Chris Martenson, a Peak Prosperity website, and he's been on top of the coronavirus thing from the very beginning. It's an excellent website. Maybe I'm not allowed to say that, but
no,
the point is that he discussed this yesterday or the day before in his broadcast, and he pointed out that it's suspiciously low, but he understands why it is. It turns out, he has the information that Germany basically doesn't consider somebody to have died of the coronavirus if it brings on a heart attack and the person actually dies of a heart attack. So that's why they have a relatively low numbers, and that's how they.
I thought the heart attack side effect of coronavirus was relatively rare, that it was, in the under 5%. And if that's the case, that would not affect your overall mortality statistics significantly.
Okay, well, maybe, but that was just my example. Maybe, if
I think here in the United States, you've got people who are dying of heart attacks because of coronavirus. You've got people who are dying of pneumonia because of coronavirus. And the coronavirus is not being tested for. It's not being diagnosed. And these people are being shipped off to a morgue or a mortuary or for cremation without even knowing that they have coronavirus. I would guess that our statistics are probably understated by about 10% because of that, particularly in red states where they don't realize that they have a problem yet.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then I'm not sure. I'll have to. But I just wanted to say that thanks to thanks to the web, I've been collecting data for the past 2 weeks, 14 days, and I'm a retired physicist, so I can do the math and do the data, and so I've graphed all this.
You're going to have to call another time and finish that thought. I'm very sorry.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be right back. It's 15 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, live from Shelter in Place, my home in Portland, Oregon. And welcome back. John in Long Beach, California. Hey, John, what's up?
Hi, good morning. This is kind of a hearsay thing, but I have a friend who has a relative up the management chain in GM and was told that the respirators or ventilators that they're going to be making are actually scheduled to go to Italy rather than the U.S. Didn't know if you heard anything about that.
Really? No, I didn't know anything about that, and I would be very surprised if that happens. I know that China is shipping ventilators to Italy and to Spain, and they're shipping other medical supplies, personal protective equipment. They used to ship that stuff to us, but apparently they're not anymore. Go ahead.
I would think the government would be involved with any contracts outside the United States with other countries, wouldn't you think?
They certainly have the right to involve themselves. The Department of Commerce can insert itself into any foreign transactions. So, but after Trump has put so much of his reputation on the line with this GM Ventec thing, I would just be astonished if what you said is true, John. If you can find any documentation for that, would you please tweet it to me?
Absolutely. Thank you much.
Great. Thanks a lot, John. Have a great day. John, from John to John, this is John in Langley, Washington. Hey, John, what's up?
Hi. Last night I listened to KPFA Sunday News, and it had nurses talking of being on the front line and how the CARES Act didn't just pass over them. They tried to get an amendment in or something to get protective equipment, and they just feel like they're being really left behind, and they're the warriors. And the National Nurses United supports Medicare for all, and I have 3 Democratic representatives in federal positions that I call regularly since 2016 when I was a Bernie delegate that will not endorse Medicare for all. So my question for everyone out there is, what's it going to take for the Democrats, the Democratic Party, when it's an obvious case that we need Medicare for all? What's going to turn these people in Washington? And I want people.
Well, I think there's 2 quick answers to that, John. At the risk of sounding glib, the first is it's going to take a pandemic, and it looks like that's happening. I mean, people are realizing that our healthcare system is part of the critical national security infrastructure of this country. And we haven't had that conversation since World War II. And after World War II, Dwight Eisenhower started building hospitals like there was no tomorrow. It was a major part of his construction efforts, along with the interstate highway system and schools. And a lot of hospitals around the country were built during the 1950s as a consequence of that, and they continued in the 1960s, to the point where we had 1.5 million hospital beds in 1980, the year Reagan was elected. We're down to 1 million now. We've lost 1/3 of all the hospital beds in America because of consolidation and neoliberalism. But we actually took that seriously once upon a time. And then secondly, you said, what's it going to take? That's going to be the first thing. The second thing that it's going to take is getting money out of politics. It's going to take stopping the health insurance industry, stopping the hospital industry, stopping the pharmaceutical industry from basically owning politicians inside the Democratic Party and the Republican Party as well. But that's what it's going to take. If you want to speak specifically about Democratic representatives, I think you can easily figure out who's getting money from the health insurance companies and who's not.
Yeah, apparently
Quick point,
John. All right, thank you.
Okay,
my point is,
lot,
I tried to talk to Rick about, well, whatever. Everyone.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you have about 10 seconds when that music starts. So, John, thank you for the call. Good try. We'll be back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Hey, we have a new video up for the supporters of our program over at thomhartmann.com. I really enjoy doing these separate from what we're doing on the air because sometimes I can say things that would be impolitic or inappropriate to say on the air. Like the name of the website that I'm talking about in this video, and I lay it out and share it with you on the video. It's ratbleepingthecourts.com, and the bleeping, of course, is a word that you just can't say on the air that starts with F. And this website is just outing these judges that Donald Trump and the Federalist Society have been sending through Mitch McConnell's Senate like a friggin' assembly line, and how unqualified they are, how hateful they are, how aggressively they've worked to screw students, to deny. Well, one of them actually said that women who are on birth control pills, that should be reason to fire people. Right? I mean, it's just insane. You can check it out over at thomhartmann.com. Back. Carol in Port Charlotte, Florida. Boy, your state's getting ready to be hit. Carol, I hope you're being very, very careful and taking it very, very thoughtfully and carefully.
Yes. I told you the other day that I work in an assisted living facility. But anyway, today I was thinking that, with all of the first responders in New York trying to find places to sleep, including in their cars so as not to infect their families, why couldn't someone ask the hotels to use their empty rooms to house these people? And you and Marc were just talking about Trump trying to grab credit. He could get a lot of good credit by just using Mar-a-Lago and places that he has in New York, the empty rooms, volunteering. So this is my thought.
I think that's probably beyond the pale for him. He would not be willing to pay the health expenses of his employees who might get exposed. But there are big hotel chains that have lots and lots of properties in New York City and other cities all across America. Marriott and Hilton come to mind as at the top of the list, where if they put out a call to employees and said, we'll pay you a higher than normal pay, we'll give you good benefits, we'll protect you if you get sick, and we only want people who are under 30 years old, and will you be willing to work in this? We're going to open this one particular hotel and make it available to all the firefighters and police officers and EMTs who are afraid to go home. They're afraid that they might be, and train those employees in how to wear masks and gloves and how to, just basically change the protocols in the hotels so that the employees largely keep safe and so that the workers can get to and from their hotel rooms and, put hand sanitizer in every room. I mean, this could be a huge thing if one of these chains that's, Marriott and Hilton right now are taking a huge economic hit. And if they wanted to really not just rescue, but revive their reputations, that's an absolutely brilliant idea, Carol, and they should be doing it. And Trump doesn't need to order it. I mean, this is the kind of thing that private companies are going to have to do. and really should be doing. I think we're going to see more and more of these innovative solutions as time goes on. Carol, brilliant. Thank you very much for the call. It's great to hear from you. Ben in Evanston, Illinois. Hey, Ben, what's up?
Hi, Tom. My question is regarding, have you noticed the inadequacy of the media coverage regarding the economic relief bill? And the Democrat, basically, Pelosi is, I watched the interview with Maddow on Friday night, and after the signing statement, Trump said he doesn't feel as though this oversight is really applicable, that it won't be reasonable. Then Pelosi just said, oh, well, we'll be able to have oversight. It makes no sense, Tom. This is the same Treasury Secretary.
There's going to be no oversight, just like there's no oversight over Trump's taxes. There's no oversight over his criminality. There's no oversight over his loans. There's no oversight over his, paying off porn stars. I mean, it's just like there's, he has successfully stonewalled everything, and he will stonewall this. This is going to be a slush fund that's going to go to big corporations that are in Trump's pocket. And part of that slush fund, after he passes it out to them, is going to be recycled back into his campaign coffers. Mark my words. This is a $500 billion fund. If he passes it out in billion, $2 billion, $3 billion, $500 million chunks, those companies are going to be kicking back in millions and millions of dollars, each one of them, into his campaign funds. And this is just, Trump looking at another way to buy the friggin' election. Ben, thank you. Phoenix in Missoula, Montana. Hey, Phoenix, what's on your mind today? Phoenix, you are on the air? No? Okay, I'm put you on hold there. I think you may be a first-time caller. Joyce can pick you up and let you know how to do it. Jim in Phoenix, Arizona. Speaking of Phoenix, Jim in Phoenix. What's up?
Hi, Tom. I was just calling. The caller talked about Germany's low death rates. I just wanted to mention that there's a 10-day lag between the onset of symptoms and death. So if you go back 10 days...
Well, it can be as much as 20 to 30 days. Right.
Right. That's the average, though, I've heard is 10. So, if you go back 10 days in Germany's case rate, you get a 3.6% death rate with their current death stats. So it's actually not as good as it looks. It's just a curve,
Yeah, I don't think any of these stats are going to be meaningful until we can look at them in retrospect. And I'm very suspicious about... Go ahead.
Yeah, if you look at South Korea, they've done massive testing, people that are just exposed, not symptomatic, and their death rate comes out around 1.7, I believe. So that's probably the most reliable number I've seen.
Yeah, South Korea has total confirmed cases, 9,500, total deaths, 152. That's as of 29 March. That was yesterday. And in the United States, we have 103,000 confirmed cases and 16,800, well, actually, we're over 2,000 now, total deaths. It's amazing how rapidly it's going up. Pakistan
a little scary.
has 2,500. Oh, no, I'm sorry, that's Iran. Pakistan's only 1,300. These death statistics, this is just mind-boggling what's going on. Thank you, Jim, for the call. Good to hear from you. And yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I'm going to tell you about the Nordic way to make an economy work right after the break. Stick around. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And, of course, we'll be picking up your phone calls and more of the news of the day right after this.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Our book. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Medical Apartheid, the Dark History of Medical Experimentation on Black Americans from Colonial Times to the Present by Harriet A. Washington. This is from the introduction. On a sylvan stretch of New York's patrician Upper Fifth Avenue, just across from the New York Academy of Medicine, a colossus in marble, august inscriptions, and a bas-relief caduceus grace, a memorial bordering Central Park. These laurels venerate the surgeon James Marion Sims, MD, as a selfless benefactor of women. Nor is this the only statuary erected in honor of Dr. Sims. Marble monuments to his skill, benevolence, and humanity guard his native South Carolina State House, its medical school, the Alabama Capitol grounds, and a French hospital. In the mid-19th century, Dr. Sims dedicated his career to the care and cure of women's disorders and opened the nation's first hospital for women in New York City. He attended French royalty. His Grecian visage inspired oil portraits, and in 1875 he was elected president of the American Medical Association. Hospitals still bear his name, including a West African hospital that utilizes the eponymous gynecological instruments that he at first invented for surgeries upon black female slaves in the 1840s. But this benevolent image vies with the detached Marion Sims portrayed in Robert Thom's J. Marion Sims, Gynecological Surgeon, an oil representation of an experimental surgery upon his powerless slave, Betsy. Sims stands aloof, arms folded, one hand holding a metroscope, the forerunner of the speculum, as he regards the kneeling woman in a coolly evaluative medical gaze. His tie and morning coat contrast with her simple servant's dress, head rag, and bare feet. The painting, commissioned and distributed by the Park Davis Pharmaceutical House more than a century after the surgeries, as one of its History and Medicine in Pictures series, takes telling liberties with the historical facts. Thom portrays Betsy as a fully clothed, calm slave woman who kneels complacently on a small table, hand modestly raised to her breast before a trio of white male physicians. Two other slave women peer around a sheet, apparently hung for modesty's sake, in a childlike display of curiosity. This innocuous tableau could hardly differ more from the gruesome reality in which each surgical scene was a violent struggle between the slaves and physicians, and each woman's body was a bloodied battleground. Each naked, unanesthetized slave woman had to be forcibly restrained by the other physicians through her shrieks of agony as Sims determinedly sliced, then sutured her genitalia. The other doctors who could fled when they could bear the horrific screams no longer. It then fell to the women to restrain one another. I wanted to reproduce Thom's painting on the cover of this book, or at least in the text, but when I asked permission of its copyright holder, Pfizer Incorporated, the company insisted on reviewing the entire manuscript of this book before making a decision. As an independent scholar, I could not acquiesce to this, and I used another cover image. When I renewed my request to use the image within the text, Pfizer agreed to base its decision upon reading this chapter and an outline of the book. The Pfizer executives apparently were uncomfortable with what they read because they refused to grant permission to reproduce this telling image or even respond to my query after I supplied the requested chapter and outline. This act of censorship exemplifies the barriers some choose to erect in order to veil the history of unconscionable medical research with blacks. Betsy's voice has been silenced by history, but as one reads Sims' biographers and his own memoirs, a haughty, self-absorbed researcher emerges, a man who bought black women slaves and addicted them to morphine in order to perform dozens of exquisitely painful, distressingly intimate vaginal surgeries. Not until he had experimented with his surgeries on Betsy and her fellow slaves for years did Sims essay to cure white women. Was Sims a savior or a sadist? It depends, I suppose, on the color of the women you ask. Marion Sims epitomizes the two faces, one benign, one malevolent, of American medical research. Quote, "Of all the forms of inequality, injustice in health is the most shocking and the most inhumane." In 1965, Martin Luther King Jr. spoke those words in Montgomery, Alabama, at the end of the Selma to Montgomery march that had been attended by the black and white physicians of the Medical Committee for Human Rights. King had invited the doctors not only to give medical help to injured marchers, but also to witness the abuse suffered at the hands of segregationists. With these almost unnoticed words, King ushered in a new era in civil rights because, as delegate to Congress Donna Christensen Christian MD, chair of the Congressional Black Caucus Health Brain Trust, has declared health disparities are the civil rights issue of the 21st century. Thus, Dr. King's alarm over racial health injustice was prescient, and were he alive today, his concerns would be redoubled. Mounting evidence of the racial health divide confronts us everywhere we look, from doubled black infant death rates to African-American life expectancies that fall years behind whites. Infant mortality of African Americans is twice that of whites. The book, Medical Apartheid by Harriet A. Washington. We have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who are regular supporters of our program, and the essence of it is, I use a couple of examples. There's hundreds of them out there. In one case, Alabama is preparing to execute a man who was not guilty of the crime that he committed with a relatively high level of certainty, but still they're gonna kill this guy, an African American. And the other story out of New York State, where the police officers hogtied this guy, arms, elbows behind him, tied his legs together, and then threw him down a flight of stairs, mangled his face. He looked he was totally beaten. 12 hours later, he commits suicide in his cell. How is it possible that our prisons do this kind of stuff? Because the 13th Amendment says that slavery is still legal in the United States. You have no rights if you've been convicted of a crime. We need to amend the Constitution. Check it out at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I was going to share, I told you earlier I'd share with you The Nordic Way to Economic Rescue is the title of this piece, The New York Times by Peter Goodman. And it's a great analysis of what's going on around the world. In Denmark, political parties from across the ideological spectrum joined with labor unions and employers this month to unite behind a plan that has the government covering 75 to 90% of all workers' salaries, provided that the companies don't lay anybody off. The Danish government is also covering costs like rent. In the Netherlands, the government is stepping in to cover 90% of wages for companies that have lost more than 20% of their revenue. The British government is covering 80% of wages. We're not doing that here. We've slightly augmented the unemployment system, but we're not backstopping our employers. And the reason why is breathtaking that it appeared in an article in the New York Times. Quote, excuse me, the primary reason that this sort of approach appears unthinkable in the United States is the same one that limits options to expanding health care and lowering the cost of university education. Wealthy Americans have proved adept at shielding themselves from taxation. Jacob Kierkegaard, a senior fellow at the Peterson Institute, says, you don't have a comprehensive welfare state in the United States because it implies a politically unacceptable level of redistribution. And that's true. And the conservatives are just absolutely unwilling to do that. In the United States, tax revenues amount to 24% of annual economic output, 24%. It was 28% before George W. Bush became president. It's down to 24%. George W. Bush and Donald Trump both had huge tax cuts, with most of the benefits flowing to really, really rich people. So we're at 24%. That's the elbow room. That's the space within the government, within which the government can work. In the Netherlands, it's 39%. In Britain, it's 34%. And in Denmark, it's 49%. Almost half of the equivalent of economic activity. It's not half of the economic activity, but an amount of money equal to about half of economic activity in Denmark cycles through the government and is provided to people in the form of housing subsidies. There's basically no homelessness there. In the form of free health care. Everything is free, every part of it. In the form of free education, you actually get paid to go to college in Denmark. And the result is the happiest people in the world, a strong infrastructure, a strong social safety net, and a country that actually works and that is dealing with this coronavirus. Meanwhile, the New York Times is also reporting on when the U.S. tried to build ventilators. And interestingly, this was the last year of the George W. Bush administration.
In the last year of the Bush administration decided that, this was as a result of the H1N1 flu or the possibility of it coming. And I forget whether it was SARS. I think it was SARS and one of the first Ebola outbreaks. But the SARS thing, that's it hits your lungs. And so 13 years ago, in the last year of the George W. Bush administration, they started this thing. It was a project codenamed AURA, A-U-R-A. And what they estimated was that if there was going to be even a moderate pandemic, basically, of influenza that was like on par with the 1918, that was a severe one. If we only got it moderately, that we would need nationwide an estimated 70,000 additional ventilators. So the question was, how do you build 70,000 ventilators? Now, how do you do it at the lowest possible cost? They wanted to, ventilators at the time were selling for $15,000, $20,000, $25,000. So they sent out a request for proposals in 2008 to companies saying, if you can build a ventilator for $3,000, we'll buy 70,000 of them. And this small company out of Casa Mesa, California, called Newport Medical Instruments said, we will do it. This was a small specialty company that was already making and selling ventilators. They said, we will do it. And they awarded this contract just a few months after the N1H1 outbreak. Now we're into the Obama administration. And every 3 months, officials with that Newport company and the Biomedical Research Agency of the U.S. government were getting together, and the company was submitting monthly reports. In 2011, the company shipped 3 working prototypes to the federal government and said, what do you think? Here's your $3,000 ventilator. We can mass produce them. That was 2011, 9 years ago. And Dr. Friedan, who then ran the CDC, said, I got all excited. It was a multi-year effort that resulted in something that was going to be really useful. And they were supposed to go for market approval in September of 2013. And then everything changed. This little company that had gotten the contract to do these, was bought out in 2012, in May of 2012, by Covidien, a large medical device manufacturer, for $100 million. Now, why did Covidien buy out this little company? Apparently, it's because Covidien themselves makes ventilators, and they didn't want this little company undercutting their price. They also bought 5 other medical device companies, perhaps for the same reason. The New York Times says it this way. They're a little more charitable. Government officials and executives at rival ventilator companies say they suspected that Covidien had acquired Newport to prevent it from building a cheaper product that would undermine Covidien's profits from its existing ventilator business. So by 2014, we were supposed to have 70,000 ventilators. We had none. And Covidien executives said, we want out of this contract. They broke the contract. This is in 2014. In 2015, Covidien got sold for $50 billion to an even bigger company, Medtronic, who said, we don't know anything about this. This is dead. And that's how America lost 70,000 ventilators, to the friggin' so-called free market. Chuck in Heritage, Pennsylvania. Hey, Chuck, what's on your mind today?
How you doing, Tom? Hey, I just thought I'd throw a little information at you. I'm retired Air Force. I worked in the supply system, and we dealt with the chem warfare gear. Now, everybody in the military, or everybody in the branch I was in, had 3 sets of gear, okay, which are heavy boots.
You mean personal protective equipment?
Yeah. It wouldn't be something that a doctor could wear, but the stuff's out there, okay? There's huge warehouses full of this stuff out there. One of the last places I was at was Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and they have huge warehouses of this stuff out there. Now, I don't think it would work for the doctors, but very much of it could be used. But I don't think it worked.
Hey, the doctors are clothing themselves in garbage bags right now, yes. Chuck. I mean, it's like anything is better than nothing.
When I hear this, it's like this stuff's out there. Now, you had a hood, which had glasses in it. You had a mask, which had the filters in it. You had like a pants and a jacket and heavy boots and 2 pair of gloves. This stuff is out there. It just needs to be.
I am guessing, Chuck, that the military is hoarding this stuff because they're expecting that they're going to get hit. I mean, the idea of 6 foot social distancing in the military is virtually impossible. I mean, this is going to burn through the military, and it's going to burn through it fast. You've got at least 3 ships now, U.S. Navy ships, where this has been diagnosed on the ships. I think that, when the Mercy and the Comfort pull into port, even though they're going to be taking non-COVID emergency cases, it's going to get aboard those ships. It's going to rip through those ships. Trump yesterday said, I got 10,000 ventilators, but I'm not sending them to anybody because, we may need them. He's basically hoarding stuff for when the red states start to melt down. Then he's going to ride to the rescue in the red states. He's perfectly willing to let the blue states die. I mean, that's really obvious, saying that, in New York City, they're selling these things out the back door. I mean, what kind of crap is that?
When Trump said about, I'm not a supply clerk, the military is the biggest supply organization in the world. They have capabilities to do unbelievable stuff, move stuff all around the countries. I used to keep track. I did that, and I did parts for the C-130. We knew where every single part for every single C-130 was anywhere in the world. We could access that stuff in no time. And for Trump to say that he's not a supply clerk, he's not, but the military is, and they could do this. All he would have to do is let them do it. I don't, between the two different things, it's like, this is what I experienced and this is what I saw, and it's like, it's driving me nuts. It could be done. Yeah. It could be done if he just wants to do it.
Wow. Because you did work in the supply chain in the military. In the Air Force.
I did it for 19 years.
Amazing. Chuck, thank you for the call. Thank you very much. It's great to hear from you. And thanks for watching Free Speech TV, too. We'll be back. It's 45 minutes past the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program, broadcasting live from my home office in Portland, Oregon. We are sheltering in place to the extent that we can in our organization. I hope you are, too.
You're listening
Stay safe.
to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls in the news of the day. Right after this, we'll be talking about George Washington in the third hour of the program. And Alex Lawson will drop by. Stick around. And welcome back. Let's see here. Cassandra in Orchards, Washington. Hey, Cassandra, what's on your mind today?
Hi. You were talking with the previous person who was talking about the supplies that are being hoarded. And I've come up with a term that I like to use that I call fuel capitalism. And to me, this is like one huge, feudalism turned into capitalism. Capitalism, I have a feeling in its purest form, is basically nothing more than feudalism. And Trump is at his peak right now of control, so that, how do I put this? We are the peons, the peasants, the what have you. And like you said, he's run to the rescue for the red states, because those are the peons and the peasants that actually fall for his line of garbage and will do anything he says. And not just him. He is only there because Mitch McConnell, because, Pence, because his son-in-law, all of these people that are, and I'm sorry, all of them are willing to bow to the political power of the corporate entity to give them what they want. They've made them into the feudal lords.
Yeah, the oligarchs.
And yes. And so we are all there. And, I was a history major. So one of the wonderful books that I've been reading lately, Supreme Inequality, by Adam Cohen, it shows how in the Nixon era, when the Warren Court is gone and Nixon has basically packed the court with all of his lovely Republican, our whole system of allowing presidents, first of all, to put people into power in the Supreme Court should be gone. That's totally political. Even when it was Warren and it was in our favor, it was still it's a political agenda. And this idea that we keep people in for 20, 30 years, and this is what is allowing political entities such as Trump and the Republicans, and I'm sorry, the now fallen Democratic Party, to control us and to make us into what we have, I guess, always been, which is peasants that are at the whim of the feudal lords. And we dress it up, we call it by different names, but, you know, the pig in the room is still in a tutu and makeup, and it's still a pig. And they are what they are, and we are what we are, but we keep telling ourselves, it's like saying that we have a middle class. And I heard a lovely thing the other day that just summed it all up. If you call yourself middle class, or, you know, are you poor, are you middle, are you upper? Well, you're poor if you do not have at least 3 years worth of something. Like right now, we're all housed in our homes. I'm paycheck to paycheck. Most people are. If you live paycheck to paycheck, you're poor. If you have about a 3-year backup, you're probably middle class. And if you have anything over that, you're of that very, very rare, 2, 1.5, whatever percent that have money. Right. We are fooling ourselves.
I think instead of 3 years, 6 months is the amount that I've actually seen used, for those kinds of analysis.
Okay, and I suppose it does depend on which ones, but yeah, I just think that we are still stuck in feudal capitalism, and we're trying to call it many different things, but we need to understand that we're being controlled.
I agree. I wrote a book called Screwed back in 2005, I think, or 8, something like that. And there's a whole chapter in it about Marc, the historian who's the world's leading expert on feudalism, and how we are now a feudal society. Spot on, Cassandra. Thank you for the call. Hey, did you know that Hillary Clinton actually won Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Florida in the 2016 election? It's on page 92 of my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting. We have a new video up over at ThomHartmann.com for people who are regular supporters of our program, and the essence of it is, I use a couple of examples. There's hundreds of them out there. In one case, Alabama is preparing to execute a man who was not guilty of the crime that he committed with a relatively high level of certainty, but still they're gonna kill this guy, an African American. And the other story out of New York State, where the police officers hogtied this guy, arms, elbows behind him, tied his legs together, and then threw him down a flight of stairs, mangled his face. He looked he was totally beaten. 12 hours later, he commits suicide in his cell. How is it possible that our prisons do this kind of stuff? Because the 13th Amendment says that slavery is still legal in the United States. You have no rights if you've been convicted of a crime. We need to amend the Constitution. Check it out at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And let's see here. Uli in Teaneck, New Jersey. Hey, Uli, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Thank you for taking my call.
My pleasure. What's on your mind, Uli?
Yeah. I would like to bring something up, if I may, what Trump said this morning on Fox.
Oh, I missed it. What did he say?
Okay. I quote, "The things they had in there were crazy. They had levels of voting that if you ever agreed to it, you would never have a Republican elected in this country again." And he was referring to Democratic efforts to include provisions in the stimulus bill to require each state to establish universal vote by mail, early voting, among other measures.
Right.
And I say, loose lips sink ships.
I agree. Trump was speaking the truth, and it wasn't crazy. I mean, the fact of the matter is that if the majority of Americans actually could vote and did vote, you would never again have a Republican president. There's no doubt about it, and that may well be the case. My concern, as I've said before on this program, is that these guys are going to basically When the election comes, you've got a bunch of states where you can't do mail-in ballots, or it's very difficult to do mail-in ballots, and people are not going to show up at the polls. And so the states are going to report to the president of the Senate when the electoral vote comes in that they cannot certify their own electoral votes. This is what happened in the 1876 election between Hayes and Tilden. You had 4 states that could not certify their votes. It was Oregon was one of them, Louisiana, Georgia, and there was one other state. The other 3 were Confederate states. And in each case, it was because they were occupied by the Union Army, and the Democrats, the Southern Democrats, the former Confederates, were complaining that they were being intimidated by the Army, and the Republican voters were complaining that in all 4 of these states, including Oregon, the Klan had been rioting and during the election and intimidating voters. And so in these 4 states, they said, we can't be certain that this vote is legitimate. And as a result of that, neither Hayes nor Tilden had the required 50% plus 1 electoral votes to become president. And as a result of that, it got thrown to the House of Representatives. Now, the story got much more complicated after that, and I won't go through the whole story, but basically, when the House of Representatives votes for president, this is under the 12th Amendment, by the way, when the House of Representatives votes for president, each state has 1 vote. And that 1 vote is cast according to how the state legislators, the governors have no say in this, how the state legislators want it to go. Well, you've got 34 states where the Republicans control the state legislatures or have a majority in the state legislatures. In some cases, they have a majority in the House and they don't even control the Senate, but the House and Senate get combined together for that vote. So Trump would be elected 34 to 26 if that was to happen in November. And I think, frankly, that there's a very, very good chance that that's the little trick the Republicans are going to try and pull off. So, forewarned is forearmed, but we need to force voting in those states. Uli, I got to run, but thanks for the call. Rudy in Atlanta. Hey, Rudy, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, thanks for taking my call. You had a couple of callers that I totally agree. One said political genocide, and the other was basically said that the U.S. military can move basically heaven and earth if they were instructed to do so. And that's just the problem that I have, Tom. We're not taking precaution. Businesses, especially the businesses out here, if they're not taking precaution to protect the customer or the employees, which leads me to believe, and I don't get into conspiracy, but you have the right president at the right time to push this situation. And basically you have this guy, he really doesn't, he doesn't give a damn, Tom, and we need to really wrap our arms around and embrace that and understand what we're dealing with.
Yeah.
Because we're going to keep infecting one another. We're going to keep reinfecting one another, and we're not going to know who's infected.
Yeah, Rudy, at the top of the next hour, or actually at the top of the next hour, we've got Alex Lawson. He's going to talk about Social Security and the impact on this new bill. But after that is over, I'm going to explain why it is that American corporations are willing and in some cases enthusiastic about not providing their workers with protection, and why they think that that's a good business strategy in addition to the obvious one of saving the money and not having to buy masks and gloves and things like that, hand sanitizer. But there's actually a strategy at work here, and it's a strategy that goes all the way back to the American Revolution. This has been done before. And, I'm going to lay the whole thing out. It has to do with smallpox and George Washington. But this strategy, this play, as it were, this little performance that we're seeing with these companies has been done before, and they think that there's an upside to them. And they may be right, but it's the cost to the public and the cost of public health and the cost of all these dead people is horrific. Rudy, thank you for the call. Stick around. I'll be getting into that probably about 20 minutes after the next hour. We'll be back with Alex Lawson from Social Security Works. We're going to find out what impact this postponing of the Social Security tax in the stimulus bill that was just passed is going to have on Social Security and on us. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study by Stefano Harney and Fred Moten. This is from the introduction. It starts with love, exchange, fellowship. It ends as it begins, in motion, in between various modes of being and belonging, and on the way to new economies of giving, taking, being with and for. And it ends with a ride in a Buick Skylark on a way to another place altogether. Surprising, perhaps, after we have engaged dispossession, debt, dislocation, and violence, but not surprising when you have understood that the projects of fugitive planning and black study are mostly about reaching out to find connection. They are about making common cause with the brokenness of being, a brokenness, I would venture to say, that is also blackness, that remains blackness, and will, despite all, remain broken, because this book is not a prescription for repair. If we do not seek to fix what has been broken, then what? How do we resolve to live with brokenness, with being broke, which is also what Moten and Harney called debt? Well, given that debt is sometimes a history of giving, at other times a history of taking, at all times a history of capitalism, and given that debt also signifies a promise of ownership but never delivers on that promise, we have to understand that debt is something that cannot be paid off. Debt, as Harney puts it, presumes a kind of individualized realization to a naturalized economy that is predicated upon exploitation. Can we have, he asks, another sense of what is owed that does not presume a nexus of activities like recognition and acknowledgement, payment and gratitude? Can debt become a principle of elaboration? Moten links economic debt to the brokenness of being in the interview with Stefan Shukatis, who he acknowledges that some debts should be paid and that much is owed, especially to black people, by white people. And yet he says, I also know that it is, that what it is that is supposed to be repaired is irreparable. It can't be repaired. The only thing we can do is tear this stuff down completely and build something new, end of quote. The Undercommons do not come to pay their debts, to repair what has been broken, to fix what has been undone. If you want to know what the Undercommons wants, what Moten and Harney want, what black people, indigenous people, queers, and poor people want, what we, the we who cohabit in the space of the Undercommons want, it is this. We cannot be satisfied with the recognition and acknowledgement generated by the very system that denies A, that anything was ever broken, and B, that we deserve to be the broken part. So we refuse to ask for recognition, and instead we want to take apart, dismantle, tear down that structure right now. That right now limits our ability to find each other, to see beyond it, and to access the places that we know live outside its walls. We cannot say what new structures will replace the ones we live with yet, because once we have torn stuff down, we will inevitably see more and see differently and feel a new sense of wanting and being and becoming. What we want after the break will be different from what we think we want before the break, and both are necessarily different from the desires that issue from being in the dark. Let's come at this by another path. In the melancholic and visionary 2009 film version of Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are, 1963, Max, the small seeker who leaves his room, his home, his family to find the world beyond, finds a world of lost and lonely beasts, and they promptly make him their king. Max is the first king the wild things have had, whom they did not eat, and who did not, in turn, try to eat them. And the beasts are the first grown things that Max has met, who want his opinion, his judgment, and his rule. Max's power is that he is small while they are big. He promises the beasts that he has no plans to eat them, and that this is more than anyone has ever promised them. He promises them that he will find ways through and around and will slip through the cracks and re-crack the cracks if they fill up. He promises to keep sadness at bay and to make the world with the wild creatures that roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws. That Max fails to make the wild things happy or to save them or to make the world with them is less important than the fact that he found them and he recognized in them the end of something and potentially the path to an alternative in his world, or an alternative to his world, The wild things were not the utopian creatures of fairy tales. They were the rejected and lost subjects of the world Max had left behind. And because he shuttles between the Oedipal land where his mother rules and the ruined world of the wild, he knows the parameters of the real.
He sees what is included and what is left out, and he is now able to set sail for another place, a place that is neither the home he left nor the home to which he wants to return. Moten and Harney want to gesture to another place, a wild place that is not simply the leftover space that limbs real and regulated zones of polite society. Rather, it is a wild place that continuously produces its own unregulated wilderness. The zone we enter through Moten and Harney is ongoing and exists in the present, and as Harney puts it, some kind of demand is already being enacted, fulfilled in the call itself. While describing the riots of London in 2011, Harney suggests that the riots and insurrections do not separate out the request, the demand, and the call. Rather, they enact the one in the other. The book is The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study. We have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who are regular supporters of our program, and the essence of it is, I use a couple of examples. There's hundreds of them out there. In one case, Alabama is preparing to execute a man who was not guilty of the crime that he committed with a relatively high level of certainty, but still they're gonna kill this guy, an African American. And the other story out of New York State where the police officers hogtied this guy, arms, elbows behind him, tied his legs together, and then threw him down a flight of stairs, mangled his face. He looked he was totally beaten. 12 hours later, he commits suicide in his cell. How is it possible that our prisons do this kind of stuff? Because the 13th Amendment says that slavery is still legal in the United States. You have no rights if you've been convicted of a crime. We need to amend the Constitution. Check it out at thomhartmann.com. Account of free speech, but a necessary intervention. Us to be more critical of the term, and maybe along with it, of the other lofty concepts we must hold near and dear. The case against free speech.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. On the line with us is our old buddy Alex Lawson, who fills in for me from time to time and is and runs our affiliate in Washington, D.C., We Act Radio. He's also the executive director of Social Security Works, socialsecurityworks.org, a man of many, many talents and who wears many hats. His Twitter handle, A-Law, as in Alex Lawson, A-Law202. And Alex, welcome back to the program.
Tom, thanks for having me.
It is so nice having you. By the way, there's a slight delay here because I'm doing the show remotely from home. So, if we step on each other, so be it. We'll just have to put up with it. I've been seeing headlines, mostly the days before the bill was signed, but some after, that there was a pause in the Social Security tax collection from employers. I saw some stories say this is going to, take a bite out of the Social Security Trust Fund and make Social Security less stable. And then I saw other articles saying, no, it's just a pause. It's, they have to make it up next year, blah, 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 blah. What's the real story here? What's going on with this? How does this so-called stimulus affect the Social Security, the institution of Social Security, the trust fund, and future benefits?
So, Tom, it's a little complicated, as always with Social Security. When they're attacking it, they like to do it in very convoluted, confusing manners. So let me just give you the facts of the payroll tax cut. What's happening here is that employers are able to defer their side of the payroll tax contribution for their workers for a period of time. And then, yes, they're supposed to then pay it back. And yes, if they don't pay it back or can't pay it back, the general fund, i.e. our income tax, will make Social Security whole. But it is using the dedicated revenue of Social Security for something that it's not supposed to be used for. And there's no reason to do this except to put Social Security in the crosshairs in the future. So you heard it there about how the general revenue would make the system whole. So the money is coming from general revenue.
And they always say, like, don't worry, it's coming from general. Well, then just give it from general revenue in the first place. There's no reason to bring Social Security in unless your plan is in a few months to hold up your hands and say, oh, woe is me. We love Social Security, but now it's contributing to the deficit. And look at these spiraling deficits. We're just going to have to cut benefits. There's no reason that Social Security should be used to pay for anything other than our benefits that we've earned. So it's just a matter of maintaining eternal vigilance on this. And we're going to fight in Stimulus 4 to get rid of it as a paying mechanism in Stimulus 3. We're not going to give up on this one.
So you're expecting that come the end of the year, when companies are supposed to either pay it back or say, I'm sorry, we're too broke, just let the Treasury pay for it. And it turns out that, I mean, we're talking, I think, about a little less than $1 trillion a year here, that the companies are going to say, we can't pay it. And so the federal government has to pay it. And at that point, you're going to have people like the Peterson Institute and these other groups that want to privatize Social Security, all the big Wall Street banksters. They're all going to be screaming, there's a $100 billion or $500 or $900 billion or $1 trillion raid on the general fund by the Social Security Administration. We can't allow that. Social Security shouldn't be raiding the general fund. I mean, that's going to be the rhetoric, right, on Fox News?
That's exactly it. I would adjust the tone slightly, having done this a few times. I know you have as well. That's the outraged one. What they're going to do is more of the woe is me. Oh, we love Social Security, and we would love to not have to cut benefits, but unfortunately, hard times make hard decisions, and this money's coming out of the general, but it's the exact same thing. There's no reason for Social Security to be in the middle of this unless you want to leave that opening to attack it in a few months' time.
Wow. So, the other question I had for you relative to this was, an employer, when an employer says or forces or whatever, I mean, what's the mechanism whereby the federal government picks up the employer's share? Does the employer have to be bankrupt? Do they have to be broke? Do they have to be in distress? Is there some threshold, a critical threshold? Do they have to sign a certificate? Is this something that's going to be widely used by small businesses across America who employ about 2/3 of all Americans? Or is it going to be just something the big businesses use? What's that mechanism?
So like many things in the stimulus, a ton of money was moved out the door with a lot of unanswered questions. So the actual mechanism is not extremely visible, but is likely to be bankruptcy, right? So a business has to pay back their deferred liability unless they're unable to. And unless they're unable to would be required to, file some form of bankruptcy. But again, there's a lot of unknowns in this stimulus, but that's most likely what it would be.
Wow. So you said that this could be fixed in the next stimulus bill. Nancy Pelosi is working on that right now. I'm assuming that although the Senate is on a 3-week vacation, that Mitch McConnell's got people working on it. What would that look like?
It's really easy. So Senator Ron Wyden actually had an alternative plan. He's a great champion of Social Security. Also, he's the ranking member on the committee in the Senate. It's in his jurisdiction. And he put forward just a really straightforward thing. Instead of putting Social Security in the middle of it, let's just do tax credits from the general fund for the exact amount of the payroll tax deferral, right? So let's say you owed 10, instead of not paying the 10 and then having to pay it back, there'd just be a tax credit to you that said, here's 10. A much better way of doing it, you look around the world at what governments are doing to care for the people during this pandemic and, covering 80% of their wages for the course of the emergency, and here it's a $1,200 check. That's a little unfair because the unemployment insurance is the big victory in Stimulus 3 is the expanded UI. But that's the alternative, and we're going to say that we should just Ron Wyden has this, Senator Wyden has this plan. That's what we should switch it to in Stimulus 4. Even if we miss a few days, right, if it's in effect for a little bit. We think that mitigating it is still worthwhile. And the whole while, we also raise the profile of this issue. Tom, I don't know how much time we have. If you wanted a little bit of, we've seen this before,
about a minute and a half,
right? President Obama was forced to use a payroll tax cut because the Republicans wouldn't let him use a tax credit in 2010. And we didn't see the cuts at the end of it, but we were ringing the alarm bell the whole time, and we think that's what blocked them from being able to do it, is because we raised the profile of it. So that's a key part of what we're doing right now.
If people want to call, if people want to call 202-224-3121, the switchboard for Congress, and leave a message for their two senators and their member of the House of Representatives, what specifically should they say?
Get rid of the payroll tax cut immediately from Stimulus 3, or just get rid of the payroll tax cut. Keep your hands off my Social Security.
Okay, just that simple. Nothing about Ron Wyden or anything?
I mean, if you wanted to get into what to replace it with, they can say get rid of the payroll tax cut and replace it with Ron Wyden's refundable tax credit. But the key thing is get rid of the payroll tax cut. Those are the words that we want everyone in Congress to hear over and over and over again.
There you go. And the number for Congress, again, is 202-224-3121 or 225-3121. They'll both get you there. Alex Lawson, SocialSecurityWorks.org. Thank you, Alex.
Thanks, Tom.
And thanks for keeping We Act Radio and everything else on the air. Alex Lawson, great guy. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's 15 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls and the news of the day in just a moment. And welcome back. Had to replace batteries there on my receiver. Let's see here. Lorraine in San Diego. Hey, Lorraine, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Hi. Thank you very much for having Alex Lawson explain that. That was so informative. My question regards the Congressional Information Pipeline. At the time that Senator Burr's selling of his stocks was brought out, he received a secret briefing. Now, he's the head of the Senate Intelligence Committee. So did an intelligence organization brief him, or did someone else notify him? And
we
was briefed,
we don't know.
By a.
Let me just answer that part first, Lorraine. What we don't know exactly who briefed Burr or what, or when or how. But what we do know is that our spy agencies have basically leaked it. That back in late December and early January, they were notifying both the White House and the intelligence committees in the House and Senate that this virus was going to get out of China, it was going to get here to the United States, and it was going to be bad. And of course, after he and Kelly Lawson, I think is her name, the senator who is the wife of the president of the New York Stock Exchange, those two senators just made a killing selling stock before the market crashed. And one of them, I believe it was Kelly, was buying stock in things like Zoom and companies that would make money on Citrix was another one, the company that does Go to My PC, making money on that. Go ahead.
What puzzles me is that the House didn't make it public, and Senator Shaheen was quoted as saying that she didn't understand why it was a secret briefing. Now, was that kept secret in order for senators and congressmen to be able to sell any stocks that they had to benefit from it financially? Or why didn't our elected representatives recognize this as a potential crisis? I keep seeing this coronavirus crisis situation reflective of the financial cost to the country. It has never really reflected how it's going to impact the American people. And I think that's a disgrace. it seems like if the House got the same information, they're complicit in this, in not taking action and not publicizing it more.
Yeah. Generally speaking, I agree, Lorraine, but the spy agencies themselves are the ones who determine what level of classification they need when they have a meeting with members of Congress. So they define how classified something is. And it is a federal crime, a major go to prison for years and years federal crime for a member of Congress to reveal the contents of a classified briefing. And those spy agencies all work for Donald Trump. So if they're telling Trump this, and all the evidence is that they were, and then Trump is telling them, well, if you tell this to Congress, you need to make it the highest level of classification so this doesn't get out, then all of that starts to make sense. Does that make sense, Lorraine?
Yes, thank you very much. I appreciate that help.
Thank you. Thank you for the call. I mean, it's a grim story, right? It's a Machiavellian story. It's a bizarre story, but it makes sense. We'll be back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past the hour. Our 1 hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3 hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. We have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who are regular supporters of our program. And the essence of it is, you know, I use a couple of examples. There's hundreds of them out there. In one case, Alabama is preparing to execute a man who was not guilty of the crime that he committed with a relatively high level of certainty, but still they're gonna kill this guy, you know, an African American. And the other story out of New York State where the police officers hogtied this guy. Arms, elbows behind him, tied his legs together, and then threw him down a flight of stairs, mangled his face. He looked he was totally beaten. 12 hours later, he commits suicide in his cell. How is it possible that our prisons do this kind of stuff? Because the 13th Amendment says that slavery is still legal in the United States. You have no rights if you've been convicted of a crime. We need to amend the Constitution. Check it out at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And I told you I was going to tell you about George Washington. Here's the thing. Well, let me just tell you the George Washington part, and then I'll tell you the American corporation part. Back in the day, actually back in 1750-something, 1751, in October, November of 1751, George Washington and his older brother Lawrence traveled to Barbados. And George got sick. Started with a headache, then a fever. He felt malaise. When his morning routine, getting out of bed, was curtailed with a severe backache, anything like he'd experienced before. He had a chill running through his body, which was unusual given that it was very warm in Barbados. And then the rash started. And eventually the rash covered his whole entire body. He was 19 years old. He was on an adventure, and he had smallpox, George Washington. Now, you see the paintings of him, you don't see the pockmarks, but he was severely poxmarked. And as were many of the people of that era. And those pockmarks, while the painters didn't put them in, those marks were actually a sign of employability. Because once you've had smallpox, you can't get it again. You have lifelong immunity. George Washington, on November 16, 1751, 19-year-old George Washington writes in his diary, "I was strongly attacked by the smallpox." And he was confined 25 days with the smallpox, confined to his house. And the initial symptoms got worse and worse until he finally broke his fever and came back out of it. But 25 days he was sick. And the techniques that they used to help him were to bleed the patient when the fever was high, purge and bleed during the second fever, and employ methods to decrease inflammation, including medicine, fluids, and a special diet. But, you know, in this book by Elizabeth Fenn, Pax Americana, the Great Smallpox Epidemic of 1775 to 82, she talks about how George Washington devised an elaborate plot. The problem that he had was that smallpox had been widespread in England for years and years, and it was not in the colonies in the American colonies. It was pretty much just in the port towns where it would come in with the British soldiers. And you know, if a ship came in with the pox on it, they would literally burn the ship in the harbor. And so the problem that George Washington had was, as all these British soldiers were coming over, not only were they bringing smallpox with them, but they were actually sending pox-infected people into the towns and into the communities to infect the American rebels. And so George Washington, and at the time they knew that if you took one of the little blisters, one of these little bubbles that was full of pox, if you took the stuff out of that and injected it into a person or scratched them deeply and stuck it under their skin, it was called inoculation. If you did that, they would get a mild case of smallpox, but they would recover because this contained all the antibodies as well. And they would recover, not always, but 99%, 90+% of the time they'd recover. And they would be immune to smallpox for the rest of their lives. So George Washington did this with the entire American army. In 1777, he ordered a mandatory inoculation of all recruits. And the inoculation had to be conducted with great secrecy because what it meant was all of his troops are going to be sick for 3 weeks while they had a mild case of smallpox. So they did this, they accomplished it, and that was one of the things that helped George Washington win the war. Well, I think that some American employers are doing the same thing. They're looking at such a large pool of people who want to work that they're just saying, you know, we'll just let this burn through our workforce. This is for unskilled labor. We'll just let this burn through our workforce, and eventually we're going to have a bunch of people who are immune. And in the meantime, if we lose 10, 20, 30% of our workers, we can easily hire those people out in the marketplace of people who can prove that they already had COVID-19. So it's like, you know, Washington's inoculation, smallpox inoculation, which didn't kill people, is being done, it appears, by some of these large employers in a way that, frankly, will kill people. On the other hand, it might be a very good business move, right? Because a few months down the road, one of the reasons that George Washington, he was in the British Army for a long time before he left the British Army in the late 1760s. And became basically an American rebel. And he rose up through the ranks all the way up to colonel in the British Army, in part because he had pox marks. He could prove that he was immune. So, there was a time back in the 1770s when there was an epidemic of smallpox going on in North America, and it had been sweeping Europe for hundreds of years. There was a time when, that immunity was actually used and useful in a way. So I think that, we're going to, within a matter of a few months, frankly, Trump is talking about getting the economy back on board. Within a few months, we're going to have a substantial pool of people who had COVID, and once we've got a serum test, can prove that they had it, who are now immune, who can go back into the workforce. It's going to get real interesting.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And frankly, it's one of the things that makes me a little less panicky about our supply chain, particularly our food supply chain, because there will be people available for work shortly.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur. This is a book that was written back in the late 90s, but it's still very, very timely. This is from the second chapter titled Class Antagonisms Inside the Fundamental Contradiction of National Oppression. Having just passed the 19th and quickly approaching the 20th anniversary of the LA Rebellion, We should be reminded here of what Rodney King whimpered as he stood in front of a bank of microphones surrounded by class enemies and neo-colonial politicians. We should remember how he'd been dressed in that non-threatening cardigan sweater, white shirt, and black tie, how his hair had been tortured into submission by a jerry curl. We should reflect as well upon how timid and spooked he looked, and on how concerned and stern those who flanked him were as well. That was a Kodak moment. It was staged to foster an image of contrition and resignation, submission, a victim. Rodney King had been led to believe, through a bourgeois sense of reasoning, that the rebellion was really about him, that the reason new Africans and Mexicanos took to the streets of South Central was the result of his filmed beating. That, of course, is typical of mechanical bourgeois thinking. What it's not typical of, however, is someone from the hood. And this cuts both ways. No one in the hoods and barrios ever thought it was about Rodney King. We'd all seen the film over and over like everyone else, but that was par for the course. We'd always seen that, long before anybody caught it on tape. Actually, we'd experienced much more than that. Why, it's safe to say that the hoods had gone to war with each other in vicious waves of internal, intra-class combat for much less than that. Though, because of a general colonial mentality which prevents the challenging of bottom-up oppression, the same hood forces will not, in any systemic way, wage war on the pigs, or for freedom, land, and socialism. Rodney King alone, and of his own accord, would not have thought to hold a press conference to ask the asinine question in the form of a whimpering request, can't we just all get along? The fact of the matter is, we are getting along. New Africans and Mexicanos are getting along just fine. What we couldn't understand was why he was admonishing us for getting at the exploiters of our communities. The impression he gave, with his handler's hands up his back like a ventriloquist troll, was that a race riot was going on, as if we had all begun to kill each other or burn and rob each other's homes. His handlers compelled him to send up a false flag, a diversion. But you see, this was the very thing that exposed the class interests and reactionary politics of the Uncle Toms that had been designated to handle him, and by extension, us. Let's go back for a minute. Let's talk social development, aka history. There exists a fundamental contradiction in our lives that, like an elephant in the room, no one wants to acknowledge. As a consequence of the war waged upon various African nations by European powers, those of us captured and kidnapped were taken out of our own self-determining social developments and violently forced into Euro-American history. This is not simply a clever play on words. This is a reality. We lost the ability to control our own destiny. Read that again. From that time until now, the fundamental basic contradiction between the U.S. oppressor nation and our own oppressed and colonized nation has been the governing imperialist relationship, which is to say, us not being in control of the qualitative factors that determine our lives as a people, as a nation. Our tradition of struggle against this fundamental contradiction has taken many forms, some hidden or obscured, some open and hostile. But all of these have been open to resolve the fundamental contradiction and to regain our independence. While there have been some bona fide struggles to resolve the contradiction, there have also been reactionary neocolonial struggles waged by internal enemies loyal to the oppressor nation and culture that have tried time and time again to subvert and control our destiny for the benefit of the capitalists. They've come among us, always imposed from above, stirring up emotions and giving lip service to progress, equality, justice, and prosperity. These always within the colonial confines of the oppressor's arrangements, and none collectively ever materialize, because without a resolution of the fundamental contradiction, that is the freeing of our productive forces from U.S. imperialism and the governing of our own affairs, we'll remain a minority within the American system as opposed to a majority in our own, and subjected to the established bourgeois social contract, i.e. colonialism, neo and post. We can parade all through the empire with black congressmen, black mayors, black governors, black police chiefs, black Supreme Court justices, hell, even a black president. And absolutely nothing will alter the genocidal relationship that governs our national oppression here, because the blacks are part of the colonial apparatus. They have made a strategic alliance with the capitalist imperialists to act as go-betweens in our oppression and exploitation. This is a conscious class stand. The black petty bourgeois is not innocently confused, like, say, Mrs. Jackson across the street is, about our national oppression, about the existence and subjugation of New Africa. They are well-read, have traveled in our experience. They've just chosen sides against us and in favor of our historical enemies. And the sooner we recognize and internalize this, the better off we'll be. Black ain't nothing but a color. As a designation of our national identity, it has played out. It is a superficial understanding at best and a foolish and dangerous analysis at worst. We have no collective control over the qualitative factors which determine our lives. We do not, in other words, control our destiny, not as a people or a state. The book is Stand Up, Struggle Forward by Sanyika Shakur.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, broadcasting live from our shelter at home, from home. Steve in St. Genevieve, Missouri. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind today? Steve? No Steve. Okay, I'm going to put Steve on hold. Joycey's on line 2. You can find out what's going on. Heidi in Bellevue, Washington. Hey, Heidi, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. My great-grandmother died in the Great Flu epidemic. She was a nurse, and she left behind 7 children under 12. But so I took this pandemic very seriously early on, and basically locked my family down because I don't want to leave my one remaining child at home without a mother. But anyway, I had called you a few years ago about I had worked at Amazon for 6 months to send my daughter to France for her Sweet 16, and it was a very, very dangerous place to work then, and they treated their employees very badly. Just as an example, I had a breast cancer scare. Things turned out okay, but I'd had a biopsy, and I was supposed to work that night, and I had a doctor's note that I shouldn't, lift or anything for 48 hours. And it was painful. I know Louise has gone through much worse. But anyway, so I went over with my doctor's note, and they said, not like, oh, I'm so sorry. It was, well, that will go, because if you take too much time off, it goes towards points to fire you. They fire people very easily. So I had to go to work with the, I'm just overly responsible. Sometimes I went to work with the, bandage and everything. But so what I would do, as I said, I've been in lockdown for a long time now. I loaded up on 9 weeks of supplies. I usually have, I've been waiting for the big earthquake, so I already had, a lot of supplies. But, I'm missing some things, like I underestimated the amount of milk we'd need. The dogs pooped on the carpet, and I'd really love to order a carpet cleaner. The basketball.
So I get all that, Heidi. Heidi, what's the point of your call? These are interesting stories, but what's the point of your call?
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. So the point is, please don't use the warehouses. You can do without. Our revolution just sent out a petition with the one of the big 4 congresswomen, to sign off to protect these workers. That's the next. Yeah. That's going to be the next big epidemic.
I get it. There's a big movement to in fact, the people at what is it, Checkout or something. There's a company that does the delivery services for a whole bunch of places around here, a lot of the restaurants around here, and they're demanding better pay, hand sanitizer, personal protection equipment, paid sick leave, all these kinds of things, as are the Amazon workers. And I think that we all need to. I'm with you, Heidi. We all need to stand in solidarity with those people. Thank you very much, Heidi. Steve in St. Genevieve, Missouri. You want to try it again?
Yeah, sorry about that. My thumb was on the mute button. I've been wearing my mask since January, but because I saw this coming when the first case got here, I didn't hesitate. But anyhow, there were 3 major outbreaks of the Spanish flu, and the last outbreak in 1919. The 2 major cities that got hit the worst on the startup of it was St. Louis and San Francisco. And that's when they decided, okay, everyone has to wear a gauze mask. And if you were caught not wearing one, you were arrested and fined. China did that, but they were more drastic. They literally bolted the door of your house so you wouldn't get out. That's the reason why they're
And they're doing the gauze mask thing all over Asia. Yeah, exactly. And the gauze mask thing is all over Asia, and I think it's a good thing. What they've done, of course, they have them available, right? They're manufacturing them there. Trump had 3 months to plan for this, and he just dithered it away, bragging about his ratings on TV. And now he's saying he did if only 100,000 Americans die, I did a really great job. Wait a minute, that's twice as many as died in Vietnam. Seriously? China has 3,000 people dead. South Korea has 300 dead. China's a month and a half ahead of us, almost 2 months ahead of us. South Korea got their first case the same day we got our first case. They have 300 dead. We have we're closing in on 3,000. I mean, pretty soon, in the next couple of days, Trump is going to have more dead Americans than there are dead people in China. That's breathtaking. When this thing started in China, this is the breathtaking level of incompetence. But, it would be wonderful if this administration could come out and say everybody needs to start wearing a mask, not just to prevent yourself from getting sick, but in case you're sick and you don't realize it, to prevent you from giving it to somebody else. Because you can literally get this from standing next to somebody and simply breathing the same air they're breathing. They don't even have to be talking. And that's why we all need to wear masks. But the fact of the matter is we don't have enough masks in the United States for everybody to wear a mask, which is bizarre, but it's true. So anyhow, enough of my rant. Norma in Woodbridge, Illinois. Hey, Norma, what's on your mind?
Yes, just a quick question. When you mentioned we needed to call our congressman about getting rid of the payroll tax cut and replace it with refundable tax cut, which stimulus bill was that?
The most recent one. The $2 trillion.
What number was that? Did it have a number? Okay.
It was stimulus number 3.
Okay. All right. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Sure. You're welcome. Thank you, Norma. Marc in Sauk City, Wisconsin. Hey, Marc, what's up?
Hey there. Adam Schiff made some comments about the corruption of Donald Trump, which we all think. But I just ran across this one from Hamilton 75, which talks about the president as chief magistrate and treaties. But there's a passage in here that I think is prescient for today. But a man raised from the station of a private citizen to the chief magistrate, possessed of a moderate or slender fortune, and looking forward to a period not very remote when he may probably be obliged to return to his station from which he was taken, might sometimes under the temptations to sacrifice his duty to his interest, which would require superlative virtue to withstand. An avaricious man might be tempted to betray the interests of the state to the acquisition of wealth. An ambitious man might make his own aggrandizement by aid of the foreign power the price of his treachery to his constituents. And it goes on a little bit, but I mean,
and all of that has come true.
Donald Trump to a T. I mean, Hamilton is crying out from the past about this, and I mean that in spite of the flaws of our founders, I mean, we had to turn some of our thoughts to them, what they thought of this, and the betrayal of our Senate to fail to remove the president is something that they, frankly didn't see happening because they, they had hoped that the men that had been elected would actually do their duty rather than, serve their own self-interest, which they're doing. I mean, Ron Johnson is making all these comments about dead people, and is he promoting himself in this?
Yeah. No, Ron Johnson has been particularly toxic on this, the Republican senator from Wisconsin. Spot on, Marc. Thank you very much for the call. Sky in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Hey, Sky, what's up?
Hi. Just go back to the statistics that you gave with people passing away. How are the funeral homes handling it? An example, over in Italy, I believe they're cremating people because of them dying from the virus. Do you know anything about this?
They are. I saw photos. I don't know if it was Italy or Spain, but it was in a giant church, and they had all these row after row after row of coffins. And yes, the cremation business is really popping right now. And you've got 2 hospitals in New York where they got refrigerator trucks parked outside the hospitals that they're putting dead bodies in because their morgues are full. This is going to get a lot worse before it gets better, Sky. And this is what Donald Trump has brought us by 3 months of incompetence and bluster and braggadocio. It is just criminal. Thanks a lot for the call, Sky. Mike in Pacoima?
Pacoima.
I don't know how to say that.
Pacoima.
Okay, in California. Okay, Mike, what's up?
In California, yeah. You had somebody on who was talking about Trump having the Dunning-Kruger effect. Psychologically.
Well, that was a caller, but I agree with it. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And then there was someone else after that who said it can go away. It's not permanent. Well, that is incorrect. It's relatively permanent. First of all, it's caused, and then there is a cause for it. The cause is causes him to have zero empathy also. But the cause comes from early trauma. What that early trauma was, who knows? But it could be during birth. It could be not being loved by your parents, not being touched and kept warm by your parents. Lots of those things. But also, the really more important thing is science. The fact that he doesn't understand the zero about science, and that's why he's against science. And he's saying scientists are no good. Even now, I venture to say that he does not understand what this virus is all about. He learned one word from somebody, which is exponentially, but he doesn't understand what that means either. So
I absolutely agree. If he had any understanding of what's going on here, Mike, we would have taken a very different course starting in January, or at the very least starting in December. We know that he was being briefed about this in December. In December and in January. So anyway, we'll be right back. It's 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Hey, support our advertisers if you're listening on a commercial station. Support our local stations if you're listening on a nonprofit station. Thank you. And welcome back. Let's see here. Christine in Boca Raton, Florida. Hey, Christine, what's on your mind today?
Yes, Tom, are you aware that the United States Department of State.gov website, it states that on February 7th, the United States donated 17.8 tons of PPE, including respirators, to China, including hundreds of millions of dollars from the government and private sector to China. United States Department of State.gov, February 7th, 2020.
I am familiar with that. I mentioned it in the first hour of the program. That was back when Trump was still saying it's a Democratic hoax and all that kind of stuff. And he was trying to suck up to Chairman Xi, or President Xi of China, hoping that Xi would not continue to enforce the tariffs against our farmers and things like that. It was a naked attempt at bribing China, and might have worked, and Trump is not being held to account for it. I think the media has just figured out that this happened in the last 48 hours. But it truly is grim, shall we say, for lack of a better word. Christine, thank you. Thanks for bringing that up. It needs to be repeated more frequently. Daniel in Renton, Washington. Hey, Daniel, what's on your mind today?
Okay, hello. Do I have you?
You do. You're on
hello.
the air. Daniel? Okay, we lost Daniel. I'll put him on hold here, and you can pick him up, Joyce. He's on line one. Boyce in Hendersonville, North Carolina. Hey, Boyce, what's up?
Yes, sir. I'm hearing on the news that only a N95 mask will be effective at keeping the virus away. And I'm wondering if there's any point in buying any other mask.
Yeah, if you're looking for, N95, it's called 95 because it only blocks 95% of particles. It's of, very small particles. And I think they're half micron size, but I could be wrong on that. But I think that that's the standard for those masks. A regular gauze mask will block a smaller number of particles and will allow through larger particles. Viruses, are much smaller than a half a micron, no matter what. So none of these masks are going to give you the kind of protection that a genuine respirator would, where you've got separate breathing apparatus. And that's why people need to be using physicians, people who are in direct contact. And this is one of the reasons why 12% of the people who have died of coronavirus, or who have coronavirus, in Spain, are healthcare workers. As of yesterday, it was 56 doctors in Spain had died of this coronavirus. This is burning through the healthcare community right now. And it's going to be burning, and it is in New York City right now, and it is going to be across the United States. It's burning through our police departments. It's burning through our EMTs, and really, really harming, crippling, weakening our ability to respond to it. And part of the problem is, again, if Trump had done, early on things that would have encouraged people to shelter in place, if he had started this back in January or even in February, then we wouldn't see this crisis the way we are. We wouldn't have had Mardi Gras, we wouldn't have had spring break, and you wouldn't have as many infected people, and the hospitals deal with it more slowly and using more effective, respirators and masks and things. Right now, they've got their back to the wall and they've run out of options. Boyce, thanks a lot for the call. Even though, in a worst-case situation, even a piece of cloth over your face is better than nothing. It keeps you from infecting other people, or reduces the chances, and it keeps other people, and it reduces the chance of other people infecting you. We'll be right back. Hey, did you know that Hillary Clinton actually won Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Florida in the 2016 election? It's on page 92 of my new book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Jim in Chicago. Hey, Jim, it says you disagree with me about what?
I'm just listening to your program here, and I'm just a little concerned of the stuff that you're telling people. The masks, all well and good, whether it's an N95 mask, whether it's not. If you're outside walking around, it keeps your hand from going near your mouth, your nose, your eyes. It kind of reminds you, don't touch any, you might be out there touching a railing, whatever, a doorknob, but then don't bring it into your face. So that's a good thing about any mask. If you're out there walking around, use the mask. And as far as what Trump is doing, how you're kind of negative to say, well, he's not doing enough, not doing this, that, and the other thing, I don't think there is another human being out there that would do as much as he's doing. That's all. And I don't think you can come up with the name of someone who can do it.
So what was he doing in December when the spy agencies were notifying him that this was coming? What was he doing in January? On January 20th, when the first person was diagnosed in the United States, and the same day the first person was diagnosed in South Korea, and within a week South Korea had test kits deployed, and within 2 weeks they'd tested tens of thousands of people. What was Donald Trump doing back then, Jim?
South Korea doesn't.
Not
like
a damn
China,
thing.
So therefore,
not a damn thing. He was sitting around saying this is a Democrat hoax. What was Trump doing the week after that, as this was spreading through Washington State? Not a damn thing. What did he do the week after that? What did he do as we moved into February? Not a damn thing. Jim, I can't even believe that you're saying this kind of crap. Bill in St. Helens, Oregon. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. First off, real quick, I believe the third stimulus bill was S6201, if people want to actually read it. Okay.
Thank you.
So when that was going through the process, I called both my senators, Merkley and Wyden, here in Oregon, and I also called my representative, Bonamici. And I said, okay, they want this payroll tax deferral on Social Security. Well, let's just throw in the fine. Let's do that, and let's lift the cap on Social Security forever as a part of the deal. Now, you and I both know that would never go anywhere, but at least it would raise it to the public conscience, and we'd start talking about it again, because it would solve so many of our problems.
I'm with you.
That's it.
I'm with you. And it would make sure that Social Security was solvent for basically forever. Yeah, very well said. Thank you for the call, Bill. Kai Kotsmovy in Arizona?
Yes.
Oh, in Lance.
Kotsmovy.
Kotsmovy?
Yes, Lance.
Okay, what's up, Lance?
Hey, Tom.
Hey, Tom, I haven't heard from you in a long time. Thanks for taking my call. Listen, you were talking about the majority of states, the Republican-led states, rather, they might be invoked to hold a vote to possibly reelect Donald Trump. Is there anything the House of Representatives are doing right now to make sure that doesn't come to fruition in the short time duration that we have? And also, Stephanie Miller was talking about this morning. All this is very political, what Donald Trump is doing at the top level. But in the future, after all this is done, can we make it criminal? I'll take my answers off the air. Thanks, Tom.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Lance. Refresh my memory as to your first question.
Oh, yeah. You were saying that if Donald Trump doesn't receive adequate...
the vote goes to Congress.
Electoral votes or something, he might call the... Yeah.
Okay, I wrote an article about this. You can find the article over at Hartmann Report with 2 N's, hartmannreport.com. It's titled something like How Donald Trump Could Lose the Election and Still Remain President. And we need to get the word out about this, because the 12th Amendment says that if the states cannot certify enough electoral votes to reach 50% of the necessary total plus 1, then the vote gets thrown to the House of Representatives, where each state has 1 vote. And there's 34 states now where their legislatures are controlled by Republicans. And you can read the whole article, and this is very distressing. Marc in McHenry, Illinois. Hey, Marc, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Related to the point you just made, if a scenario like that were to develop, what is to keep this country from exploding? I would, after the horror that we've been through and the fact that the election in 2016 was basically stolen, I'd be ready to take up arms. I got news for you. I've had it. I've absolutely had it. Yeah. And if that happens again, what is going to keep this country from exploding?
God only knows, Marc. And the way, by the way, the last caller, Lance, had asked, what can we do about this? And Ron Wyden actually has a bill in the Senate, and Earl Blumenauer has a bill in the House, which both have the support of the Progressive Caucus, that would give the federal, or it would take $500 million of federal money and give it to the states, to those 17 states where it's hard to vote by mail, so that they could just run the printing presses starting tomorrow morning and print all the ballots. Well, they can't print the ballots right now because the primaries aren't done. But once the primaries are done, they could print enough ballots for every single person in their state, so nobody has to show up at a polling place. And it is being fought by the Republicans. And this morning on Fox News, Donald Trump said, if that happens, there'll never again be another Republican president. Excuse me. And by the way, he was right.
Well, I have news for you that if that does happen, God help this country, because it will not be tolerated. It simply will not be tolerated by people like me and millions others like me.
There you go. Marc, thank you for the call. MJ in Puget Sound, Washington. MJ, we have 30 seconds. What's up?
Okay, well, I have information about funerals in Italy. People are not allowed to see their loved one when the body's released. They're taking them by military trucks out to crematoria outside, far away. So they're military.
Yeah, I've seen the caravans.
Yeah. And
well, that's going to be coming to a town near you, MJ. MJ, thank you for the call. I mean, this is what Donald Trump brought us. This is what the Trump presidency brought us. When you get a grifter as president, in with a grifter party, the Republican Party, that only stands for the wealth of the billionaire class and the big corporations, this is what you can expect. To hell with the people. Oh, I did a great job if only 100,000 Americans die. Great. Anyhow, we'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, get out there, get active, or do it from your home. Tag You're It. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great day.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.